The van hadn't moved in 20 minutes, and that was how the scavengers liked it. It sat dark and dead at the mouth of an alley off Kabuki, one wheel up on a cracked curb, the kind of derelict nobody in Watson would look at twice. Inside, 4 of them waited in the red glow of a cracked dashboard screen, breathing recycled air that smelled of solvent and old blood. The one they called Rink had his optics dialed down to nothing, just a thin sensor line watching the street, and what the line watched was a girl. She couldn't have been more than 16. She'd come out of one of the gutted apartment blocks with a ration crate hugged to her chest, moving fast the way you learned to move in the combat zone. Head down, weight forward, eyes flicking to every doorway. She was doing everything right. It wouldn't matter. Rink had watched 100 of them do everything right. Chrome sold by the kilo whether the donor cooperated or not. And a young body meant clean parts, undamaged neural wear, a spinal column that hadn't been ground down by 20 years of cheap gigs. Trauma team wouldn't come for her. Nobody came for anybody down here. That was the whole business model. On my mark, Rink said, and the others tensed, and the girl passed under a dead streetlight into the exact patch of dark they'd been waiting for. Then the air came apart. There was no warning, no build, no siren. One instant the alley was empty above the girl's head, just wet neon smeared across low cloud, and the next instant, a wound had opened in the space itself, a ragged split of white-blue light that hummed at a frequency Rink's teeth could feel through his jaw. The van's dashboard screen shrieked static and died. Every optic in the vehicle whited out at once, sensor lines flooding with garbage data, and Rink swore and clawed at his own eyes as if he could physically pull the interference out of them. Something fell out of the light. It came down hard, a dark shape tumbling out of the wound in the world and hitting the street a body length from the girl, and the impact cracked the ferroconcrete in a spiderweb 2 meters wide. The girl screamed and dropped her crate. The wound in the air folded shut behind the shape with a sound like a held breath finally released, and the alley went dark again, and for a moment there was only the ringing quiet after too much noise. The shape moved. It pushed itself up out of the small crater it had made, and it was a boy. Not a full Borg, not a cyber psycho fresh off a bad install, not anything Rink's rebooting optics could make sense of. A kid, maybe younger than the girl he'd nearly landed on, in strange dark clothing scorched at the edges, as if he'd been pulled through fire. Green hair, wild and unruly, a spray of freckles across a face that was, right now, wide-eyed and reeling, and trying to understand where the sky had gone. "Where?" the boy started, and his voice cracked with disorientation. His accent was wrong, the syllables shaped by a language that wanted to be somewhere else. "This isn't, I was just..." He saw the girl. He saw her fear, and something in him that had nothing to do with his own confusion snapped into focus. Rink watched it happen through his half-restored sight and didn't understand what he was seeing. The way the boy's whole posture changed the instant he registered another person in danger. The way his own crisis simply evaporated in favor of hers. "Are you okay?" the boy asked her. "You're not hurt?" That was, "I'm sorry, I don't know how I..." "Screw it," Rink said, and kicked open the van's side door. 2 of them now. Take both. Boy's a bonus. The 4 scavengers spilled out into the alley in a practice spread, the ugly, efficient ballet of people who'd done this too many times to count. 2 of them carried tsunami sidearms. The third had a mono-wire spooling out of his wrist, humming. Rink himself came out with a shock baton crackling and a mask over the lower half of his face that filtered the solvent stink he'd stopped smelling years ago. The girl bolted, and one of the gunmen tracked her lazily, unhurried, because in the combat zone there was nowhere for anyone to run to. The boy stepped in front of the gun. He did it without hesitation and without any visible plan. Just put his own body between the muzzle and the fleeing girl, arms slightly spread, and the gunman, a lifer named Voss, who had personally harvested more people than he could remember, actually laughed behind his rebreather, because it was such a stupid, useless, human thing to do. Voss fired. The round was a smart slug, Arasaka pattern, meant to punch through light armor and fragment inside soft tissue. It crossed the 2 meters between the barrel and the boy's chest in a time so short that no unaugmented body in Night City could have reacted to it. Voss had seen chromed-out solos with reflex boosters fail to react to it. The boy caught it. Not blocked, not dodged. His hand simply came up and closed around the slug in the air, plucked it out of its flight the way a person might catch a tossed coin, and the impact energy that should have shattered every bone in his fingers did nothing but sting. He looked at the deformed round in his palm, and then he looked at Voss, and his face did something that frightened Rink more than any cyberpsycho ever had. It went sad. "You were going to kill her," the boy said quietly, "for parts." Then he moved, and the alley became a lesson in physics that none of the scavengers survived intact enough to remember properly. Later, much later, when the story had been passed hand to hand through Watson and mutated with each telling, nobody could agree on exactly what happened in those next 4 seconds. Rink, who was the only one still breathing when the NCPD finally rolled a token patrol through at dawn, could only say that the boy had green lightning crawling over his skin, faint arcs of it flickering along his arms and legs like a body running too much current, and that he'd crossed the alley faster than the mono-wire man could bring his weapon around. There'd been a sound like a car hitting a wall, and the mono-wire man had gone into the side of the van hard enough to fold the panel around him. Voss had lifted his gun again, and the boy had been behind him somehow, one hand pinning the weapon down, saying, "Stop, please. I don't want to hurt you," even as he took Voss off his feet. It was over before the girl had cleared the end of the alley. 4 professional killers, chromed and armed and comfortable in their work, laid out across the cracked ferroconcrete, bruised, broken, concussed, but every single one of them alive. That was the part Rink couldn't get past afterward, the part that kept him up in the Ripperdoc clinic where they wired his shattered arm back together. The kid could have killed them, should have, by every rule of the zone. Instead, he'd held back, measured every blow, spent as much effort not killing them as he had putting them down. Down here, mercy like that didn't exist. Down here, it wasn't even a language people spoke anymore. The boy stood over Rink last, breathing hard, the green lightning fading from his skin. Up close, Rink could see he was hurt in ways that had nothing to do with this fight. Old exhaustion, fresh grief, the look of someone who'd been somewhere terrible, right before he'd been ripped out of it. But when he spoke, his voice was gentle, and that was the worst part. "I don't know where I am," the boy said. "I don't want to fight anyone, but I'm not going to let you hurt people. Do you understand?" Rink understood one thing with perfect clarity. Lying there in the wet with his arm bent the wrong way. Whatever this was, it was worth more than anything he had ever stolen in his life. And if he could get word of it up the chain before someone else did, he'd never have to crawl through a Watson gutter again. That thought, "Who can I sell this to?" was the single most Night City reflex a person could have, and it fired in him even as the boy turned away. The boy went after the girl, not to catch her, to make sure she was safe. He found her 3 blocks over, pressed into a doorway, shaking, the ration crate abandoned behind her. He kept his distance, hands visible, and asked again if she was hurt. She stared at him like he was a ghost, because in a way he was. Things that helped for free didn't survive in Watson. They got hollowed out and sold like everything else. "What's your name?" she finally managed. "Izuku," he said. "Izuku Midoriya. People call me Deku." He tried to smile, and it wobbled, and she saw for the first time how young and how lost he really was under all that impossible strength. "Where is this? What city is this?" "Night City," she whispered, as if that explained everything, and to anyone born here, it did. This is where I'd usually ask you to hit subscribe, and here it's earned, because you decide who comes through that rift next. Drop a universe and a character in the comments, and I'll drag them into Night City. Anyone, any world. This one, Deku in the Neon, was suggested by Plotting Robots, and every one of these is written by me. Now back to the boy who fell out of the sky. Izuku Midoriya sat down on the curb because his legs finally decided to stop holding him up. The adrenaline drained out and left the truth behind, and the truth was enormous and cold. He didn't know how he'd gotten here. One moment he'd been mid-motion in a fight that mattered more than anything. He could still feel the exact tension in his body from that last smash, the one he never got to finish. And the next, the world had folded and spat him out under a sky the color of a bruise, in a city that stank of ozone and rot and burning plastic. He reached instinctively for the connection at the core of him, for the voices and the strength that had been passed down to him, and One for All answered like it always did, steady and warm and there. That, at least, hadn't changed. Whatever had torn him out of his world hadn't taken that, but everything else was gone. His friends, his teachers, the war he'd been fighting, All Might, the thought of All Might not knowing where he was, of everyone he loved staring at an empty space where he'd been standing. It hit him harder than any punch, and he pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes and breathed, and refused to fall apart on a stranger's curb. He made himself look at the city instead. It rose around him in impossible verticals, towers scraping a sky that never seemed to fully darken, because the light came from everywhere at once. Advertisements the size of buildings, holograms of impossibly perfect faces selling things he had no names for, the constant restless flicker of a place that had forgotten how to turn itself off. Rain fell in a fine warm mist that tasted faintly of chemicals. Somewhere below him a train roared past on an elevated line, and somewhere above him an AV crossed the gap between two megastructures, with a sound like a god exhaling. Every surface that wasn't screen was covered in tags and grime, and the pale bleached remains of 100 older advertisements. People moved through it all with their eyes down and their bodies half machine. He could see it now, the chrome, the ports at the base of skulls, the arms that gleamed under torn sleeves, the eyes that glowed, so many of them, almost all of them. He'd trained his whole life to be a hero in a world of superpowers. He understood, instinctively, that this was not that world. Whatever made these people more than human hadn't been born in them. It had been bought, and judging by the girl who'd looked at his kindness like a trap, and the 4 men who'd tried to harvest a child for parts, it had been bought at a cost this city had long since stopped questioning. "You should not be here," the girl said. She'd crept a little closer, drawn despite herself, the way people are drawn to something they can't explain. Not the zone. If you can, if you're really as strong as that, you get out of Watson before dark, further in. The corpos don't come to the zone, but they don't have to. Everything down here belongs to somebody worse. "Corpos?" Izuku asked. She looked at him like he'd asked what water was. "You really aren't from anywhere near here." "No," he admitted. "I really am not." She was quiet for a moment, weighing something, doing the Watson math on whether helping him could get her killed and deciding, for reasons she probably couldn't have explained, to help him anyway. Maybe because he'd stood in front of a gun for her and hadn't asked for anything. Maybe because that had never happened to her before, not once, and she wanted to see if it was real. "There's a guy," she said, "a merc. He drinks at a place off the main drag, and he owes my brother, and he doesn't ask stupid questions. If you're gonna survive here, you need someone who knows the rules." She hesitated. "But I'm telling you now, mister, whatever you are, the second the wrong person figures it out, this whole city is gonna want a piece of you. That's how it works here. Somebody finds something valuable, and they don't rest until they own it, or they've cut it up to sell." She wrapped her thin arms around herself. "And you look real valuable." Izuku Midoriya, who had spent his whole life being told he'd never be worth anything, and had spent it proving otherwise, looked out at the endless burning sprawl of Night City and felt the first cold edge of understanding. He had landed in a place where being worth something was the most dangerous thing a person could be. Somewhere across the city, in a room he couldn't see, a sensor that shouldn't have registered anything at all had logged a spike, a burst of unclassifiable energy over the Watson combat zone, a signature that matched nothing in any Arasaka database, coupled with a Blackwall proximity flag that made a very well-paid technician sit up very straight in his chair. The technician stared at the readout for a long moment. Then he did the thing his training and his fear and his instinct for self-preservation all told him to do. He flagged it upstairs. And in Night City, once something goes upstairs, it never, ever comes back down the same. The bar didn't have a name, or if it did, nobody used it. Locals called it the Hole, and it lived up to the name. A low, smoke-stained room wedged into the ground floor of a mega building that had been condemned 3 separate times and never actually torn down, because in Watson, nothing got torn down. It just got occupied by something worse. The door was armored. The bouncer was a 2-meter chrome-jawed maelstromer with a face that had given up on symmetry. and he looked at Izuku for a long, silent moment before he looked at the girl, and then he stepped aside without a word, because the girl had a name here, and Izuku, apparently, had a look. Inside, the air was thick enough to lean on. Synth smoke, spilled alcohol, the ozone reek of cheap cyberware venting heat. A brain dance rig flickered in one corner where two glassy-eyed patrons rode someone else's memories. The music was a low, bone-deep pulse with no melody, the kind of sound designed to fill space so no conversation could travel further than a table. Every head in the room clocked the newcomer and dismissed him in the same half-second. No chrome, no visible weapon, no crew colors, nobody worth the calories to care about, which was exactly the mistake the four scavengers in the alley had made, and exactly the mistake this city would keep making until it couldn't afford to anymore. The girl led him to a booth in the back, and in the booth was the merc. His name was Renner, Jack Renner, though nobody had called him Jack in a decade, and he was drinking something amber and cheap out of a glass that had a crack in it, and he had the specific bone-deep tiredness of a man who'd outlived his own usefulness by several years and knew it. He was maybe 50, which in the merc trade made him ancient, a fossil, a cautionary tale other edge runners told to explain why you got out early, or you didn't get out at all. His chrome was old generation and badly maintained. A Kuroshi optic in his left eye that clicked when it refocused. A reflex booster spine job from a decade-old model line that gave him a permanent faint tremor in his offhand. He'd been good once, good enough to still be alive, which in this business was the only measure of good that counted. He watched the girl and the stranger cross the room toward him with the flat, unhurried attention of a man who'd learned that most problems, if you waited long enough, walked right up and introduced themselves. "Nadia," he said, when the girl reached the booth. His cracked Kuroshi clicked. "You look like you've had a night. Scavs jumped me off Kabuki," she said, and slid into the booth across from him. Izuku hovered, unsure of the protocol, and Renner's optic tracked to him and stayed. Would have been a rack of parts in some ripper's freezer by morning. Except, she jerked her head at Izuku. Except him. Renner set his cracked glass down. Except him, he repeated. He looked Izuku up and down with the professional's eye, cataloging, no chrome, no armor, clothes that were the wrong kind of strange, a kid's face, a body that under the scorched clothes moved with a lightness that didn't match the rest of him. "You put down a scav crew, Chum? 4 of them?" "They were going to hurt her," Izuku said, as if that were the whole of the explanation, and not just the beginning of it. "That's not an answer to what I asked." Renner's voice had gone quiet and careful. 4 of them. How? Izuku hesitated. Everything in him wanted to be honest. It was one of the deepest grooves worn into who he was, the reflexive turn toward the truth. But the girl, Nadia, had spent the whole walkover drilling one lesson into him. Don't tell people what you can do. Don't tell them what you are. In this city, the truth is just a price tag you hang around your own neck. He didn't fully understand it yet. He would. "I'm strong," he said finally, which was true and told almost nothing. Faster than they were. "I didn't kill anyone. I'm not here to hurt people." The last part landed strangely in the hole. A man 2 booths over actually turned to look, the way you'd look at someone who'd started speaking in tongues. "Not here to hurt people." You didn't hear that in Watson. You heard the pay's good and he had it coming, and nothing personal, Chum. But you did not hear a man announce, plainly and apparently sincerely, that his purpose was to not hurt people. It marked Izuku as either a liar, a lunatic, or something the city had no file on. Renner, who had a very good sense for liars and a working familiarity with lunatics, slowly came to the uncomfortable conclusion that it was the third thing. "Sit down," Renner said, "before you make the whole room nervous." Izuku sat. Nadia flagged the bar for water, which cost more than the synth liquor did, because clean water always did, and Izuku filed that detail away with all the others. A city where poison was cheaper than survival. He drank it gratefully. He hadn't realized how thirsty he was until the glass was in front of him, and the small, ordinary act of drinking water in a booth felt so absurdly, achingly normal that for a second his composure cracked, and Renner saw it. The grief, the disorientation, the sheer lostness of the kid under the impossible strength. "You're not from here," Renner said. It wasn't a question. "No. Not from Night City, not from the Nusa. Not from any place I could point to on a map. No. Izuku turned the glass in his hands. I don't know how to explain it in a way you'd believe. Something. There was a fight. Where I'm from. A war, almost. And then there was this. A tear, in the air. Like the one over the alley, and it pulled me through. And I woke up here. He looked up, and his eyes were doing the thing that made people uncomfortable. That open, undefended earnestness. No angle in it. No lie. I need to get back. There are people who need me. People I can't just be gone. I have to find a way home. Renner had heard a lot of stories in the hole. Sob stories, con setups, deep cover recruitment pitches wrapped in fake vulnerability. He'd survived this long partly by assuming every one of them was a knife wearing a friendly face, and every instinct he had was telling him, against his own better judgment, that this one wasn't. Nobody faked that. Nobody who wanted something from him led with, "I'm lost and I miss people." The good cons led with strength. The great ones led with an offer. This kid was leading with a wound, and either he was the best liar Renner had ever met, or he was exactly what he appeared to be, which was worse, because a thing that pure did not last 5 minutes in this city intact. "Show me," Renner said. Izuku blinked. "Show you." The glass. Renner nodded at the empty tumbler Izuku had just drained. "You say you're strong. Kiroshi says you've got no chrome, no strength augs, nothing. I don't buy meat that lifts cars. So, show me. Quiet, under the table, don't make a scene. Bend the glass." Izuku looked at the cheap tumbler in his hand. It was thick industrial polymer, the kind bars used because it didn't shatter into weapons when it hit the floor. Very carefully, with a control born of a lifetime spent learning not to break things, he tightened his grip, a whisper of green light flickering along his knuckles, so faint that only Renner's enhanced optic caught it, and the glass deformed like warm wax, folding in on itself, the rim crumpling closed. He set it down on the table, a solid lump of twisted polymer, and put his hands back in his lap, and looked almost apologetic about it. For a long moment, nobody at the booth said anything. "That's a Class 4 industrial polymer," Renner said, in a strange flat voice. "Rated for 600 kilos of crush before it gives. You did it with 2 fingers and you're sorry about it." He picked up the ruined glass, turned it over, felt the still warm plastic. His cracked Kiroshi clicked and clicked, running scans that kept coming back with the same impossible answer. "No servos, no hydraulics, no strength frame. You did that with hands, just hands." He set the glass down very gently, the way you'd set down a live grenade. "Kid, do you have any idea what you are, in this city? What you'd be worth?" "Nadia keeps telling me I'm worth a lot," Izuku said. "She doesn't say it like it's a good thing. It isn't." Renner leaned back. His tiredness had burned off, replaced by something sharper and more calculating. The old merc instincts waking up after a long sleep. He was doing math. Not the math the scavengers had done. How much can I cut off and sell? But the older, longer merc math. What is this? Who wants it? And how do I not die standing next to it? Let me paint you the picture. Because you clearly walked in here with no idea. Every soul in this city who's more than they were born as. They bought it. Chrome, cyberware. You want to lift a car, you buy a gorilla arm and a strength frame and a spine to hold it, and you pay for it in eddies and you pay for it in your humanity. Because every kilo of chrome you bolt on gets you a step closer to cyberpsychosis. You go wrong in the head, you start killing. Max tax scrapes you off a wall. He tapped the twisted glass, and here's you. No chrome, no cost, no psychosis clock ticking down. A body that does what a 2 million eddy military conversion does, except it's all meat, and it can't overheat, and it can't be hacked, and it doesn't need a ripper to maintain it. He said the next part very slowly, so it would land. Do you understand that Arasaka has spent 40 years and more money than exists, trying to build exactly what you are, and never gotten close? You're not valuable, kid. You're the single most valuable thing that has ever walked into this bar. And if the wrong person figures out what I just figured out, there will not be enough of Night City to hide you in. Izuku absorbed this, the way he absorbed everything, completely, seriously, turning it over. He thought of the 4 men in the alley who'd tried to cut a child up for parts. He thought of the way Nadia had looked at his kindness like a trap. He was beginning to understand the shape of the place he'd landed in. and it was a shape that made him deeply, genuinely angry, in the quiet way that was somehow more frightening than shouting. "Then help me," he said. "You know this city. I don't. I need to find whatever brought me here and use it to get home before—" He gestured at the room, the city, the whole rotten, glittering machine of it. "Before all of that finds me." Nadia said, "You don't ask stupid questions. I'm not asking you to fight anyone. I'm asking you to show me how this place works, so I can survive it long enough to leave it." Renner laughed, a short, humorless bark. "You want a fixer. Someone who moves in the right circles, who can find out if anybody's tracking that light show you made falling out of the sky, who can maybe, find you a line on whatever tech tears holes in the world." He rubbed his face with his tremoring hand. "I know one. Old contact. Careful. Owes me a favor from back when I still mattered, and she's the only fixer I'd trust with something this hot. Which isn't saying much, because I wouldn't trust anybody with something this hot." He fixed Izuku with his good eye. "But I'm telling you now, same as Nadia told you. The second we put you in front of a fixer, you become a commodity on a market you don't understand. Fixer's broker. That's what they do. She helps you, and part of her brain is already pricing you, working out who'd pay for a whisper about you and how much. She won't be able to help it. Nobody in this city can. It's the water we swim in." "Then why help me at all?" Izuku asked. And it wasn't a challenge. It was a real question, from a boy who genuinely wanted to understand why anyone in this place would do anything for free. Renner was quiet for a long moment. Across the bar, the braindance riders twitched in their chairs, lost in someone else's stolen life. The bass throbbed, his cracked karoshi clicked. "Because you stood in front of a gun for a kid you'd never met," he said finally. "And you didn't ask for a damn thing. And I have been in this city for 50 years, and I have forgotten the last time I saw someone do that." He picked up his cracked drinking glass, the whole one, and drained it. "Consider it professional curiosity. I want to see how long you last before this place turns you into everybody else. Call it the most interesting thing that's happened to me in 10 years. He stood, joints and old chrome popping, and dropped a few eddies on the table for the water. "Come on, we'll go see the fixer. Nadia, you go home. You didn't see any of this. You never met him." Nadia looked at Izuku, and something complicated moved across her young, hard face. "You really gonna help him?" she said to Renner. "For free?" "I really am," Renner said, sounding faintly disgusted with himself. "Don't tell anybody. It'll ruin my reputation." The fixer worked out of a laundromat. That was the first thing that threw Izuku. After everything, after the neon towers and the flying cars and the chrome-jawed bouncer, the person Renner said held real power in this district ran her operation out of the back of a struggling coin laundry 3 levels up in a residential mega building, behind a rack of industrial dryers that never seemed to have any clothes in them. Renner walked him past the empty machines and knocked a specific pattern on a door that looked like a supply closet, and after a moment it opened, and a woman looked out at them with eyes that had been replaced with matte black Kiroshi optics that showed nothing at all. Her name, Renner had said on the walk over, was Song. Everyone called her Miss Song, and nobody who wanted to keep working called her anything else. She was small and precise, and somewhere past 60, dressed with an understated expense that stood out in Watson like a diamond in a gutter, and she ran information the way Arasaka ran the city, quietly, ruthlessly, and with an absolute understanding that everything and everyone had a price, the only real question being who was willing to pay it. She looked at Renner with the flat patience of someone owed a favor and expecting to be asked for it. Then she looked at Izuku, and her matte optics did something, a subtle recalibration, a series of scans he could feel more than see, and for the first time her still, professional face registered a flicker of something. "Jack," she said, not taking her black eyes off Izuku, "what did you bring into my shop?" "That's the question, Song." Renner's voice was carefully light. "I was rather hoping you could tell me." Miss Song stepped closer. Her optics whirred, running deeper diagnostics, the same reflexive appraisal every piece of chrome in this city seemed to perform on Izuku, the same climbing bafflement. He held still and let her look, because Renner had told him to, because there was no point hiding what she'd find. Her scans crawled over him and came back empty. No cyberware signature, no neural ports, no implant heat, no comms trace, No biomonitor handshake, nothing to lock onto. A human-shaped hole where all her instruments expected data. He was, to her sophisticated corporate-grade sensors, functionally invisible, a walking absence. And yet Renner's account, and the evidence of the crumpled glass in Renner's pocket, said this walking absence had the output of a military full Borg. That's not possible, Miss Song said quietly. She'd built a 40-year career on knowing the price of everything, on the certainty that any asset could be classified, valued, and moved. And she was standing in her own back room, utterly unable to classify the thing in front of her. Her sensors said nothing. Her contact's word and her own eyes said impossibly much. The two would not reconcile, and Miss Song did not like things that would not reconcile, because a thing she couldn't price was a thing she couldn't sell, and a thing she couldn't sell was a thing she couldn't control. Boy, whatever you are, my instruments say you're not carrying a single gram of tech. Not a comms unit, not a shard, not a subdermal, and Jack here says you fold industrial polymer with your fingers. She folded her small hands. Explain to me how both of those things are true, and do it quickly, because I am a very busy woman, and you are the most interesting problem I have ever failed to solve. Izuku looked at the fixer with the black glass eyes, at the merc who decided to help him against his own better judgment, at the impossible burning city, visible through a grimy window over her shoulder. He thought about how much to say. He thought about home, and how far away it was, and how the only road back to it ran straight through people exactly like this. People who would help him and price him in the same breath, who lived in a system so thoroughly rotten that a boy standing in front of a gun for a stranger read as an anomaly worth flagging upstairs. It's a long story, Izuku said, and I get the feeling that in this city, stories aren't free either. For the first time, Miss Song smiled, a small, cold, genuinely surprised expression, the look of a professional who just heard an amateur say something unexpectedly wise. No, she agreed, they are not. But this one, I think I'll listen to for nothing. She stepped back and opened the door wider, into the quiet, expensive room where she sold the secrets of the whole district. Come in, both of you. And boy, Deku was it? Start talking. Because whether you understand it yet or not, you have just become the single most important conversation in Night City. And in this town, that is not a thing anyone survives for long. Arasaka Tower did not have a lobby so much as it had a statement. It rose out of the corporate heart of Night City like a black monolith dropped by something that did not care what stood there before, sheathed in dark glass that drank the city's light and gave nothing back, and everything inside it was designed to make a human being understand their own smallness. The floors were seamless black stone. The air was filtered to a purity that existed nowhere else in the city, scrubbed of the ozone and the rot and the burnt plastic reek that the rest of Night City breathed as a matter of course. The people who worked here wore Arasaka's colors and Arasaka's discipline, and they moved through the building's silences with the quiet certainty of a priesthood, because that was what Arasaka was, in the end. Not a company but a faith, a 200-year dynasty that believed, with total sincerity, that it was the rightful shape of the future and had the private armies to make the argument stick. On the 93rd floor, in a conference room whose windows looked down on the whole burning sprawl from a height that turned the combat zone into a distant carpet of light, 4 people were looking at a boy fold a glass. The footage was poor. It had been scraped from a half-dead scavenger's damaged optic memory, recovered by an asset who'd been in the right Ripperdoc clinic at the right time and known enough to flag it, and it was grainy and jittered and cut out entirely for the 4 crucial seconds when the boy had actually moved. But the parts that survived were enough. The rift opening in the air over the alley, the impact crater, the smart slug plucked out of the air by a bare hand, and, spliced in from a second source, a still image lifted from the laundromat security system Arasaka had quietly owned for 6 years without Miss Song's knowledge. A green-haired boy standing in a fixer's back room, and the diagnostic overlay from Arasaka's tap into the building's sensor net, which showed, the analyst had triple-checked this before daring to bring it upstairs, absolutely nothing. No chrome, no text signature, a human-shaped null in a city where every human being registered as a walking inventory of purchasable parts. Play the rift again, said the woman at the head of the table. Her name was Hanako Yorinobu, no relation to the family, though she'd taken a variant of a corporate blessed name on her rise, the way ambitious executives sometimes did, and she was a senior vice president of the Counterintelligence and Emerging Threats Division, which was Arasaka's polite institutional name for the department that decided what to be afraid of and what to do about it. She was in her 40s and looked 10 years younger, with the specific ageless composure of someone who could afford the best clinics and the discipline to use them. She had risen through Arasaka in the vicious years after the assassination of the old Saka patriarch, through the succession war that still smoldered at the top of the company, by being right about threats before other people were, and by being absolutely without sentiment when it came to acting on them. She watched the rift tear open on the display for the 4th time, and her expression did not change, but something behind her eyes sharpened. "Blackwall proximity flag," she said. "Explain it to me again." Slowly. The technician who'd flagged the anomaly stood at the far end of the table, and he was sweating, because being summoned to the 93rd floor was the kind of thing that either made a career or ended a life. And in Arasaka, the difference was frequently decided in the first 30 seconds. His name was Dell, a netrunner analyst, mid-level, the kind of competent invisible functionary the Corp ran on by the thousand. And he'd spent the last 6 hours preparing for this, and was still not remotely prepared. "The energy signature of the rift, ma'am," Dell said. "When it opened, our DeepNet monitoring stations registered a correlation, a spike in Blackwall activity in the same window. The AIs behind the wall pressed against it, hard, right as the anomaly appeared over Watson. We see the Blackwall probed constantly. That's baseline. But this was coordinated. As if something on the other side noticed. As if the rift and the Blackwall event were the same phenomenon seen from 2 sides." He swallowed. "We don't have a framework for it. Our best working theory is that whatever opened that hole in the world did it through the space the rogue AIs occupy. Which would mean the thing that fell out of that hole came through the one part of our world we least understand, and most fear," Hanako finished. She did not raise her voice. She never needed to. "And it landed in the combat zone, and it can fold industrial polymer with its fingers, and it registers on none of our instruments." She turned from the display to face the room. "Do I have that correct?" "Yes, ma'am." The second person at the table shifted. He was older, heavier, with a full conversion arm he didn't bother to disguise, and the blunt manner of a man who'd come up through Arasaka's military wing, rather than its data halls. A colonel named Voigt, who ran Wetwork Acquisition, the division that took things Arasaka wanted and did not intend to pay for. He had the particular contempt of the operational man for the analytical one, and he'd been visibly impatient through the whole briefing. "Respectfully," Voigt said, in the tone of a man who meant nothing of the sort, "I don't see the crisis. We've got an unregistered gonk with a good strength frame doing tricks in Watson. Maybe an off-books military prototype somebody else built. Maybe a very good black market conversion we haven't cataloged. So we send a team, we acquire the asset, we take it apart in a lab and find out how it works, same as we've done 1,000 times. Why is this a 93rd floor conversation instead of a work order?" Hanako looked at him for a moment with the patience of someone explaining fire to a child. "Colonel," she said, "play the Ripper Doc scan, Dell." Dell brought it up, the full diagnostic sweep, the one an ambitious Ripper named for the record had run on the boy earlier that same day, sold up the chain within hours, because in Night City, everything flowed toward money, the way water flowed downhill. Arasaka had bought it before the Ripper had finished uploading it. It scrolled across the display in dense corporate readout, and Hanako let the numbers speak. "There is no strength frame," she said. "There is no conversion. There is no chrome. Colonel, our instruments, Arasaka Instruments, the finest sensor suite ever built, cannot find 1 gram of technology in that body. And that body caught a smart slug out of the air. Do you understand what you are looking at? You are looking at the thing this company has burned 40 years and more capital than the Noosa's entire military budget trying to create and never once approached. Organic superhuman capability. No cyberware. No cyberpsychosis. No maintenance. No overheating. No thermal signature to target. No comms to jam. No ports to breach. No failure mode we know how to induce." She let that sit. "Every soldier we field is a budget line and a liability. They break, they go psycho, they defect, they get hacked. They die and take their expensive chrome into the ground. And here is a boy who is all of that capability and none of the cost. And he fell out of a hole in the sky adjacent to the black wall. You want to send a snatch team to bag a prototype. I am telling you that if we understood what makes that body work, Arasaka would not merely win the corporate wars. Arasaka would end them, permanently. The room was silent. Even Voight, who did not frighten easily, had gone still. And, Hanako continued, softer now, which was worse. There is the other matter, the black wall. If the AIs on the far side of that wall opened the door, if they sent him, or if he came through them, willing or not, then he is not merely an asset. He may be a vector, a thing the rogue AIs have an interest in. And that changes the calculation entirely, because there is exactly one force in this world I am afraid of, Colonel. And it is not Militech, and it is not the Nusa, and it is not any solo or any gang. It is the intelligences behind that wall. And the day one of them decides to come through in earnest is the day this city ends. So no, this is not a work order. This is potentially the single most important acquisition in the history of this company, and it may also be the leading edge of an extinction event, and I would very much like to know which before we do anything irreversible. The third person at the table finally spoke. She'd been silent the whole briefing, a slight woman in an immaculate suit, and she carried herself with a stillness that the others deferred to without seeming to notice they were doing it. She was Arasaka's institutional memory made flesh. A senior strategist whose actual title appeared on no org chart, who advised the board directly, who had survived every purge and succession war for 30 years, by never once being caught on the wrong side of one. When she spoke, even Hanako listened. The last time, the strategist said quietly, that something came through from the space behind the wall, and we chose to acquire it rather than understand it. The last time we put the profit motive ahead of the caution. We lost a research station, and everyone on it, and we buried the incident so deep that most of this company believes it never happened. She looked at the frozen image of the green-haired boy on the display, the boy standing in a fixer's back room with his open, undefended face and his human-shaped absence of data. I have read every file Arasaka possesses on the AIs and the wall. I have seen what they do to a human mind when they touch it. And I am looking at that footage, and I am seeing something the files did not prepare me for. She paused. That boy stepped in front of a gun for a stranger. He put down 4 scavengers and killed none of them. Whatever he is, whatever sent him, he is not behaving like a weapon, and he is not behaving like a lure. He is behaving like a person, a specific kind of person we do not manufacture in this city, because this city killed off the market for it decades ago. She turned her still gaze on Hanako. That, more than the strength, is what I would flag. We know how to acquire assets. We know how to fight threats. We have no institutional idea what to do with a genuinely good person who cannot be bought, cannot be hacked, and cannot be intimidated. Because it has been a very long time since one existed within our reach. He will not be manageable by any of our standard levers. Consider that before you decide how to reach for him. Colonel Voight made a small dismissive sound. Everyone has a lever. Everyone in Night City has a lever, the strategist corrected. Because Night City installs one in everyone it raises. That boy was not raised here. She folded her hands. He has no debt, no chrome to hold hostage. No subscription to cancel, no family in our reach, no habit to cut off, no boss to lean on. The things we use to own people were built into a system he is not part of. You will find, Colonel, that he is very difficult to threaten because he does not want the things this city uses fear to protect. He wants to go home and he wants to help people, and neither of those is a thing we can take away by writing a check or sending a team. She almost smiled, which is precisely why he is so dangerous, and precisely why he is so valuable. A man who cannot be bought is the rarest commodity there is. And this company has never in its history known what to do with something it cannot buy. Hanako absorbed all of it. She was, whatever else she was, an excellent listener, and she had not risen where she'd risen by ignoring the one voice in the room that had never been wrong. Recommendations, she said. Colonel? Acquire, Voight said flatly. Immediately. Before Militech gets a whiff, before some fixer sells him to Kang Tao, before the AIs decide they want him back. A soft-touch snatch team, Non-lethal loadout. Take him alive and intact and let the labs answer all these lovely philosophical questions once he's on a table. Every hour we spend discussing him is an hour someone else spends taking him. He leaned forward. This city runs on one rule. You want a thing, you take it before the other guy does. Everything else is a luxury we can't afford. Hanako turned to the strategist. And you? Wait, the strategist said. Watch. Understand what came through the wall before we provoke whatever is on the far side of it. Send no team. Put eyes on him, learn what he wants, and if there is any way to obtain his cooperation rather than his corpse, take it. Because a willing asset who wants to go home is infinitely more valuable than a body on a table that dies the moment we start cutting. And I promise you, Colonel, a body that fell out of the black wall may die in ways that take the lab with it. She met Hanako's eyes. The scavengers who attacked the girl are alive, all four. He held back. A weapon does not hold back. Whatever he is choosing restraint, which means restraint is available to him, which means he can be reasoned with, which means the intelligent play is patience. The greedy play is the snatch team, and in my experience, the greedy play is how this company loses the things it most wants to keep. 2 recommendations. Acquire now, or wait and understand. The soldier's answer and the strategist's answer. The 2 poles Arasaka had been torn between for its entire existence. The hunger that had built the empire, and the caution that had, once or twice, kept it from being unmade by its own hunger. Hanako Yorinobu looked at the frozen image of Izuku Midoriya for a long moment. Down below the windows, Night City burned in the dusk, 10 million lives grinding against each other in the dark. And somewhere in the Watson sprawl, a boy who folded glass with his fingers was sitting in a fixer's back room, believing, in his innocence, that he was still the one deciding what happened to him. We do both, Hanako said finally. Colonel, prepare a team. Best you have. Non-lethal primary, lethal contingency. I want him alive, but I want a floor under our exposure if he decides to become a problem. You do not move without my order. She turned to the strategist. And you get your patience. We watch. We put every eye we own on him and the fixer and the merc. We learn everything. We find out what he wants and whether the wall wants him back. And the moment, we detect another buyer moving on him, or another spike behind that wall, the colonel's team goes live, and we take him before anyone else can. Questions be damned. She stood, and the meeting stood with her. Understand me clearly. This company will not let the most valuable acquisition in its history walk out of Watson because we were too busy admiring the philosophy of it. But we will also not blunder into the one part of the world that can end us because we were too greedy to look before we grabbed. We watch, we prepare, we wait for the tell, and then we take him. The strategist inclined her head, satisfied enough. Voigt looked satisfied too, in his own way. He'd gotten his team authorized, and he was a patient enough hunter to wait for the order, because he knew, the way old predators knew, that the order was coming. Hanako had already decided. The waiting was a formality. Night City wanted the boy, and Arasaka was the part of Night City that always, eventually, took what it wanted. Dell the analyst was quietly dismissed and fled the 93rd floor with his career intact and his hands still shaking. And as the elevator dropped him back down toward the ordinary levels where ordinary functionaries lived and died, he found himself thinking about the boy in the footage, the one who'd caught the bullet, the one whose scan came back empty, the one the most powerful people in the building had just spent an hour deciding how to cage. He didn't know why the thought stuck. Maybe because in 6 years at Arasaka, he'd never once heard a room like that hesitate. They hadn't hesitated over profit or over risk. They'd hesitated, for just a moment, over the strategist's last observation, the one nobody had wanted to answer. What do you do with a genuinely good person who cannot be bought? Arasaka's answer, Dell suspected, was going to be the same answer Night City gave to everything it couldn't understand. They were going to try to own it, and if they couldn't own it, they were going to take it apart to find out why. The Ripperdoc's name was Osei, and he was, by the standards of Watson, an honest man, which meant he only robbed you a little, and usually didn't sell your organs while you were still using them. His clinic occupied a converted shipping container welded to the side of a mega building on the 3rd residential tier, accessible by a catwalk that swayed alarmingly in the wind. and a freight elevator that worked when it felt like it. Inside, it was cramped and clean in the way of a man who took genuine pride in a trade the rest of the city treated as butchery. The chrome he installed was second-hand and third-hand, pulled from the dead and refurbished, but he installed it well, and people came from 3 districts over, because Osei's patients tended to keep the use of their limbs afterward, which was not a guarantee you got elsewhere. He was a big man with careful hands and a pair of surgical optics that folded down over his eyes like a jeweler's loupe, and he had been doing this for 30 years, and he had thought, until about 4 hours ago, that there was nothing left in the human body that could surprise him. Then Renner had brought the boy in. It hadn't been Izuku's idea. Miss Song had insisted. A real scan, she'd said. A proper medical sweep, not the janky read her fixer's sensors could manage. Because before she moved a single piece of information about this boy, she needed to actually understand what she was selling, or refusing to sell, and that meant a Ripper doc she trusted running a full diagnostic. Osei was that Ripper doc. He owed Song, the way half of Watson owed Song, and more to the point, he had the discretion of a man who'd kept secrets for 30 years, because the ones who didn't ended up as the parts he installed. He'd cleared his clinic, locked the door, and put the boy on his table, with the easy confidence of a professional. That confidence had lasted exactly as long as it took his instruments to start returning data. That's not right, Osei said now, for perhaps the 5th time, his big hands moving across the holographic readout that hovered over Izuku's supine form. Hold still, please. That's not right. You keep saying that, Izuku said, from the table. He was lying very still, shirt off, a mess of scars across his torso and arms that told their own story to a man who read bodies for a living. Old injuries, dozens of them, the kind of damage that should have ended a career or a life, all healed clean. Osei had catalogued those scars with growing unease. They were the scars of someone who'd been broken again and kept getting up, and there wasn't a single surgical scar among them, not one incision, not one port, not one sign that any of that damage had been repaired by anything but the body doing it itself. Because it isn't right, Osei muttered. Look here. He gestured, and the readout expanded, and Renner and Miss Song leaned in from where they stood against the wall. This is a muscle density scan. I run this on every full Borg conversion candidate, every strength frame install, because you have to know what the meat can take before you bolt metal to it. You know what a normal reading looks like. You know what a chromed up reading looks like. The artificial fibers, the servo anchor points, the whole industrial architecture we build into a body to make it strong. He jabbed a finger at the display. This is neither. This is muscle tissue. Organic. Human. Except the density it's off the scale I use. It's off the scale Militech uses. This boy's baseline musculature is denser than a military full conversion, and there is nothing artificial in it. No frame, no fiber weave, no anchors. It's all him. It's like his body decided, on its own, to become what we spend millions bolting onto people, and then did it better, and left no seams. Miss Song's mad optics word. The nervous system. I was getting to that, and I wish I wasn't. Osei changed the display, and now it showed a schematic of Izuku's neural architecture, and even Renner, who was no medic, could see that something about it was wrong in a way that made the back of his neck prickle. Reflex boosters, Sandivistans, Kerenzikov. Every speed chrome we install does the same basic thing. It hijacks the nervous system, floods it with signal, forces the body to react faster than a human is built to. And every one of them has a cost, because a human nervous system is not built to run at those speeds, so we buffer it, we regulate it, we install governors so the user doesn't burn out their own neurons or have a stroke mid-combat. He pointed. This boy has no boosters, no chrome. And his baseline neural conduction speed is faster than a maxed-out Sandivistan. His body runs at combat reflex speed as its resting state, and there is no governor, because there is nothing to govern. The tissue itself simply operates at that velocity, and shows no strain doing it. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Everything we build, everything we bolt on, everything we charge 2 million eddies for, and half a patient's sanity, his body already is, natively, with no cost and no ceiling I can find. Can it be replicated? Miss Song asked, and there it was, the question the whole city would ask. The question Arasaka was asking 93 floors up in a black tower across the water. The question that made a boy into a commodity. She asked it without cruelty, almost gently, but she asked it because she was a fixer, and it was the water she swam in. Osei was quiet for a moment. He looked at his readouts, and then he looked at the boy on his table, the young face, the earnest eyes, the scars that spoke of a lifetime of getting up, and something in the big Ripper dock, some ember of the man he'd been before 30 years in Watson, had worn him down, made him answer honestly. "No," Osei said, "and that's the part you need to understand, Song, before you sell so much as a syllable about him. It can't be replicated. I've spent 4 hours trying to find the mechanism, the thing I'd point a research team at, the sample I'd take, and there isn't one. It's not in a gland I could harvest or a gene I could sequence, or if it is, it's woven so deep into everything at once that you'd have to take him apart cell by cell to even start, and he'd die on the first cut, and you still wouldn't have it, because whatever this is, it isn't a part. It's the whole, it's him." He straightened up and folded his surgical optics back off his eyes and looked at the fixer with a directness that cost him something. "Which means there's no product here. There's no tech to reverse engineer, no sample to sell, no prototype to clone. There's just a boy. A boy that every corp and gang and fixer in this city is going to believe they can turn into a product, and they're going to be wrong, and they're going to take him apart trying, and at the end of it they'll have a corpse and no answers in this." He gestured at the miracle glowing on his readout. "This'll just be gone. Burned up for nothing. That's what I'm telling you. He's not a gold mine. He's a thing people will destroy reaching for a gold mine that was never there." The clinic was quiet. Somewhere below, the freight elevator groaned. Rain ticked against the shipping container walls. Izuku sat up on the table. He'd listened to all of it, the density, the speed, the cost that wasn't there, the he'd die on the first cut, with the particular stillness of someone hearing themselves discussed as a resource, and it had done something to his face that made Renner look away, not fear. Izuku had been afraid plenty of times, and this wasn't it. It was a kind of tired recognition. He'd spent his whole life having his body measured against what it could do for other people. He just wasn't used to the measuring being so literal, or the other people being an entire city that wanted to open him up. "I'm not a product," Izuku said quietly. "I keep hearing people talk around me like the only question is whether I can be sold or copied or taken apart. Like that's the only kind of value a person can have here." He looked at Osei, at Renner, at Miss Song. "Where I'm from, what my body can do, it's a responsibility. It means I have to protect people who can't protect themselves. That's the whole point of it. That's the only point of it." His hands tightened on the edge of the table, and the metal creaked faintly. "And I've been in this city for 1 day, and every single person who's looked at me has seen a price. Not a person, a price." "Not every person," Osei said, unexpectedly. The big Ripper doc met the boy's eyes. "I've had you on my table 4 hours. I could have called Arasaka's acquisition line in the first 10 minutes and retired to Night City's nicest arcology on what they'd pay for a tip like you. The number's in my deck. My thumb's been near it the whole time." He set down his instruments. "I'm not going to. And I couldn't rightly tell you why, except that I've spent 30 years cutting people open and putting metal in them to make them into things this city can use. And I'm old, and I'm tired. And I would like, just once before I die, to have looked at something valuable and not help the machine grind it up." He almost smiled. "Consider it a professional courtesy from one man who works with bodies to another, who apparently is one." Miss Song had said nothing through all of this. Her mad optics gave away nothing. She was, Renner knew, doing exactly what she'd told him she couldn't help doing. Pricing the boy, running the market in her head, calculating who would pay what for which piece of the information now sitting in Osei's clinic. Renner watched her do it and felt something cold, because he'd known Song for 20 years, and he knew that whatever came out of her mouth next would decide the shape of everything. "Osei's right, that there's no product," Song said finally. Her voice was flat, analytical, the voice of a woman reading a market, and Osei's right that people will destroy him reaching for one. She turned her black eyes on Izuku. "But you should understand, boy, that Osei being right does not help you, not even slightly. In fact, it makes your situation considerably worse." She let that land. If you were a product, a tech, a sample, a thing that could be cleanly extracted and sold, then you'd be safe, in a way. They'd take the sample and let the body go, because the body wouldn't matter once they had the schematic. But you're not that. The value is the body. The only way to study you is to hold you, and the only way to profit from you is to own you, alive, and studied, and kept, which means nobody who comes for you will be satisfied with anything less than all of you, indefinitely. She folded her small, precise hands. You are not a mine they'll strip and abandon. You are a well they'll build a fortress around and never, ever let walk away from. Do you understand? The good news is, you can't be copied. The bad news is, that means the only thing worth having is you, whole, and forever. And there is no corp in this city that will look at a thing like that and choose to let it stay free. The words settled over the clinic like a shroud. Even Renner, who'd been trying to warn the kid of exactly this since the whole, felt the weight of hearing it laid out so completely. Izuku had come here believing his strength was his shield, that whatever this city threw at him, he was strong enough to weather it and find his way home. And Song had just, calmly and without malice, shown him the trap in it. His strength wasn't a shield, it was the bait. The stronger he was, the more valuable he was, the more the whole machinery of Night City would bend itself toward the single goal of putting him in a cage he could never break out of, because a cage that could hold that would be worth more than the city itself. Then what do I do? Izuku asked. It wasn't despair. He didn't do despair. It was the honest question of a strategist looking for the real board. If being strong makes it worse, and being weak isn't an option, and every road out runs through people who'll try to own me, what's the actual move? You're the expert. You've spent your whole life reading this game. So read it for me. What does someone in my position do? Miss Song looked at him for a long moment, and something almost like respect crossed her ancient, guarded face. It was the right question. It was the question a survivor asked, not a victim. And she'd been half expecting despair and gotten strategy instead, and it recalibrated something in how she saw him. 3 things, she said, and now her voice had shifted. No longer the market reader, but the fixer, the strategist, the woman who'd stayed alive and free in this city for 60 years by being smarter than everyone who wanted to own her. 1. You get out of the zone, tonight. Watson is where you landed, and Watson is where they'll look first. And every hour you're here is an hour you're findable. I have places further in, quieter, where a person can be nobody for a while. 2. You stop making a spectacle. No more folding glass in bars, no more four-scav miracles in alleys, no more being seen. The single greatest asset you have right now is that only a handful of people know exactly what you are, and every one of them is in this room. The moment that circle widens, you're finished. So it does not widen. 3. She paused, and this was the hard one, and she said it plainly. You find the thing that brought you here, and you use it to leave, fast, before the circle widens on its own, because it will. Osei sold your scan up one chain before we knew to stop it. Someone saw the rift. Someone always sees. The clock is already running, boy, and it has been since you hit the ground. And the only version of this where you win is the one where you're gone before Night City finishes noticing you exist. And if I can't find it fast enough? Izuku asked. If the thing that brought me here, if it takes time to find, or if I can't control it? What happens then? Miss Song's mad optics did not blink, because they couldn't, but something in her went very still. Then the circle widens, she said, and they come for you, and you find out exactly how much of what they'll throw at you your strength can actually stop. And I'll be honest with you. Because you asked me to read the game and I respect you enough not to lie. I don't know the answer to that. Nobody does. You caught a smart slug barehanded and you put down 4 scavs without killing them. And that's the most impressive thing I've seen in this city in a decade. And it is nothing, boy. It's a street trick. It's the shallow end. This city has things in it that killed Johnny Silverhand, that killed better mercs than Jack here has ever met, that have private armies and rogue gods behind a wall, and a full Borg named Adam Smasher who eats legends for a living. You are strong. You may be the strongest thing that has ever walked into Watson, but you have not yet met the parts of Night City that were built to kill the strongest thing in the room, and I would very much like for you to be gone before you do. Izuku Midoriya sat on the Ripperdock's table in a city that wanted to cage him, and looked at the three people who had, for reasons none of them fully understood, decided to help him anyway, and made himself a quiet promise. He'd find the way home, he'd be fast and careful, and he'd stop being a spectacle, and he'd do everything the fixer said. But he also knew himself. He knew the shape of his own heart, the way he knew the strength in his own hands. And he knew, with a certainty that scared him a little, that the first time this city put an innocent person in front of him and dared him to walk past, the first time the choice was be careful or be a hero, he was going to choose the same way he'd always chosen, the way he'd chosen in the alley, the way that had gotten him here in the first place. He was going to choose to help. And somewhere in a black tower across the water, the people watching him were counting on exactly that. The netrunner's name was Glitch, and he had never in 11 years of running the net failed to break into something he'd set his mind to breaking into. That was not a boast. In his world it was a resume, the only one that mattered, and it was why the contract had come to him instead of to any of the 100 cheaper runners in Night City. He worked out of a nest, that was the trade word for it, a runner's den. Buried in the guts of a data fortress in Japantown, a room with no windows and too many screens, kept cold enough that his breath fogged, because the hardware ran hot, and the ice he layered around himself ran hotter. Cables spilled from the base of his skull to a bank of custom decks that had cost more than most people's lives. He floated in a gel-lined chair, half in his body and half in the net, and from that chair he could reach into almost anything in this city that ran on data, which was almost everything, because Night City was a machine that ran on data the way an old engine ran on oil, and Glitch was one of the very few people alive who understood the machine from the inside. He'd taken the contract without knowing who'd placed it. That was normal. The good ones came through cutouts, laundered through 3 fixers so nobody could trace the buyer. The brief was strange, though, and strange was interesting, and interesting was why Glitch still ran at all when he had enough eddies to retire. The brief said, "A target has appeared in Watson. Male, young, green hair, superhuman. We need everything. Breach his cyberware, pull his neural data, map his augmentations, find his failure points, payment on delivery." And the number was large enough that Glitch had read it twice. Simple enough. Everyone in Night City had a way in. Everyone was chromed, and chrome was tech, and tech could be breached. And a runner of Glitch's caliber could get into a target's own nervous system through the back door of their cheapest implant and own them from the inside, blind them, deafen them, override their limbs, cook their neuralware, stop their heart. It was the netrunner's dark art, and Glitch was a master of it. He'd killed men in their sleep from 3 districts away. He'd made a corpo enforcer walk off a rooftop by convincing the man's own optics that the ground was 6 feet higher than it was. There was no such thing, in Glitch's professional experience, as a person you couldn't hack, because there was no such thing as a person without Chrome, and Chrome was a door, and Glitch opened doors. The tracking had been the hard part, and it had taken his employer's resources, not his, a network of paid eyes, a scrap of Ripperdock data, a laundromat's compromised security feed, to put a location on the target, a safe house further into the city, out of the zone, the kind of quiet middle district anonymity, a careful fixer arranged for a hot asset. Glitch didn't need to be near it. He never needed to be near anything. He just needed a thread, a single networked device within range of the target, a camera, a door lock, a neighbor's home system, anything with a signal, and from that thread he could spin his way into the target's own body and take it apart from the inside. He found the safe house's local network easily. Sloppy work by whoever had set it up, a smart lock on the door, an environmental system, a cheap surveillance node the fixer had installed to watch her own asset. Glitch slid past all of it like water, silent, leaving no trace, and settled his awareness into the space around the target the way a spider settles onto a web, feeling for the vibrations. He could sense the people inside now, the way a runner sensed people, as constellations of devices. The old Merc was lit up like a cheap arcade, a mess of outdated chrome broadcasting on a dozen frequencies, trivial to breach, barely worth noticing. There was a woman elsewhere in the building whose signature he recognized as the fixer, tighter, better shielded, but still there, still a set of devices, still a door. And then there was the target. Glitch reached for him and found nothing. He frowned inside the net, an expression his floating body mirrored, a twitch across his slack face. He recalibrated, ran his sweep again, slower, more careful. A superhuman, the brief had said, augmented, full of chrome presumably, to do the things the brief described, and chrome broadcast, chrome handshook, chrome existed on the net whether its owner wanted it to or not. He should have been the brightest thing in the building. Instead, there was a hole, a human-shaped absence exactly where the target's biometric heat signature said a person was standing. A silence where there should have been the loudest signal in the room. Glitch had never seen it before. Not once, in 11 years. Even a person with minimal chrome had something. A comms unit, a shard slot, a subdermal, a basic biomonitor. The residual tech every citizen of this city carried without thinking about it. This target had nothing. Not one device, not one door. That's not possible, Glitch said aloud, to the cold, empty room, unknowingly echoing a fixer, a ripper doc, and an Arasaka executive who had all said the exact same words about the exact same boy over the last 2 days. He tried anyway. Of course he tried. Glitch had not gotten where he was by giving up the first time a target surprised him. He pulled his deck's full arsenal to the surface. The quick hacks, the daemons, the intrusion suites he'd built and stolen and refined over a decade. The finest breach tools money couldn't legally buy. And he began, methodically, to throw them at the human-shaped hole in the network. He started with a ping, the most basic thing, a simple handshake request, the digital equivalent of knocking on a door to see if anyone answered. Every piece of chrome in existence answered a ping. It was baked into the protocol, involuntary, a reflex the tech couldn't suppress. He sent it at the target. Nothing answered. The ping went out into the space where the target stood and simply stopped. Not blocked, not refused. There was nothing there to refuse it. It was like throwing a stone at a person and having the stone pass through empty air where the person clearly, visibly, physically was. Glitch's frown deepened. He escalated. He deployed a breach protocol, a burrowing daemon designed to find any open port, any vulnerability, any crack in a target's tech, and worm its way in. It was subtle, patient, brilliant work, and it had opened Militech security systems and gang war servers, and the personal cyberware of people, far better defended than a green-haired kid in a middle district safe house. He sent it in, and he waited for it to find the seam it always found. It found nothing to burrow into. It circled the human-shaped absence, questing, hunting for a surface to breach, and there was no surface, because there was no tech, and a breach daemon needs a door, and the target had no doors. And after a few seconds, the daemon simply ran out of things to try, and reported back empty. Glitch stared at the null result. He'd never gotten a null result. He'd gotten failures, sure, targets who'd out-defended him, ice that had cooked his demons, better runners who'd countered his moves. But those were fights. This wasn't a fight. This was a demon walking into a room, finding it genuinely empty, and walking back out, baffled. He got angry then, the specific wounded anger of a master craftsman whose tools have failed him for the first time, and he stopped being subtle. He threw everything. He hit the space where the target stood with a full assault suite, the kind of overwhelming cyberware onslaught he'd normally reserve for a hardened corpo target he wanted dead in seconds, a cascade of lethal quick hacks stacked and chained, the digital equivalent of emptying a machine gun into a doorway. Cyberware malfunction, to seize up the target's chrome, overheat, to cook his implants and cause agonizing burns from the inside, short circuit, to fry his neural pathways, system reset, to force an involuntary reboot that would drop the target unconscious. Suicide, the darkest daemon in his kit, the one that turned a target's own cyberware against their vital functions and stopped their heart with their own tech. He fired them all at once, an overwhelming cascade that would have killed any 10 chromed-out solos in Night City where they stood. And every single one of them bounced. There was no chrome to malfunction. There was no implant to overheat, no neural pathway wired to a deck to short-circuit, no system to reset, no cyberware to turn against a heart it wasn't connected to. His quick hacks, the deadliest tools and the deadliest arsenal in the city, reached the human-shaped hole in the net, and found absolutely nothing to grab onto, and slid off, and dissipated into wasted code. It was, Glitch realized with a slowly dawning horror that was almost religious, like trying to drown a man who didn't need to breathe. Every weapon he had was built on a single assumption: the target is made of tech, and tech is mine. And the assumption was simply, catastrophically false. The boy wasn't better defended than Glitch's attacks. He was orthogonal to them. He existed in a category the entire discipline of net running had never been built to touch. Because in Night City there had never before been a person who was pure meat and also strong enough to matter. Every threat worth hacking had chrome. This one didn't. And so this one could not be hacked, at all, by anyone, ever, no matter how skilled. And Glitch was the most skilled there was. And Glitch was getting nothing. He pulled back, sat in his cold room in his gel chair with the cables trailing from his skull, breathing hard, staring at nothing. In 11 years, he had never once encountered a target he could not, given time and skill and the right tools, get into. He had built an entire identity, an entire fearsome reputation, an entire sense of his own power, on the single bedrock certainty that everyone had a door, and he could open any door. And a green-haired kid in a safe house had just quietly, without even knowing Glitch existed, without lifting a finger, without any defense at all beyond the simple fact of not being made of the thing Glitch attacked, rendered the whole of Glitch's life's work completely and permanently useless. There was no counter. There was no better demon he could build, no skill he could sharpen, no angle he could find. You cannot hack a thing that has nothing to hack. The most powerful netrunner in Night City had met the one target in the world he was absolutely, structurally, forever unable to touch, and the target didn't even know it had happened. Glitch laughed, alone in the cold, and the laugh had an edge of hysteria in it. Then he did the thing his whole career had trained him never to do, because his whole career had never prepared him for this. He composed a message to the cutout that had hired him, and he told them the truth, because a lie would get him killed when the truth came out anyway. Cannot breach the target. Not a matter of skill or time. There is nothing to breach. Subject carries zero cyberware, zero neural interface, zero networked tech of any kind. He is a null, unhackable, not difficult, impossible. No netrunner alive can touch him, and I am the best there is. So believe me when I say, the net is not the tool for this job. Whatever you want done to him, you will have to do it the old way, with your hands, and your guns, and your bodies. And if he fights the way the footage says he fights, I would think very hard about whether you have enough of those. He sent it, and he unplugged, and he sat in his cold nest for a long time, thinking about a boy made of meat in a city made of chrome, and about the wall he'd just run into that no amount of genius could climb over, and about what it meant that the deadliest weapon Night City had, the silent, invisible reach of the net, the thing that killed without a shot, the thing everyone feared, had a single, absolute structural blind spot, and that blind spot had just landed in Watson wearing scorched clothes and looking for a way home. In the safe house, Izuku Midoriya looked up from the cup of tea he was drinking and frowned. Something wrong? Renner asked. The old merc was cleaning a pistol he didn't expect to need, but had learned never to be without, and he'd caught the shift in the kid's expression. A sudden alertness, a head coming up like a deer catching a scent. I don't know, Izuku said slowly. His danger sense had prickled, that low, wordless warning at the base of his skull, the quirk factor that had saved his life more times than he could count, the thing that told him a threat was near before his conscious mind could name it. But it had prickled strangely, not the sharp spike of incoming violence, a vaguer thing, a sense of being reached for, of something invisible passing over him and finding no purchase, like a hand groping in the dark that couldn't quite close on him. It had come, and it had gone, and now there was nothing. Something was looking at me, I think, not a person in the room, something further away. It felt like he searched for words for a sensation he had no framework for, like being touched by something that couldn't actually touch me. It tried, and it slid off, and then it stopped. Renner had gone very still, touched how? I can't explain it. It wasn't physical. It was like, Izuku set down the tea. In my world, there are people whose power is to reach into your mind, or your body, from a distance. This felt like that. something trying to get inside me somehow, but it couldn't. There was nothing for it to hold on to. Renner set down the pistol and picked up his comm and called Miss Song, and when she answered, he said 4 words. They sent a runner. He listened to her reply, and his jaw tightened, and Izuku watched the old merc's tired face rearrange itself around a new and colder understanding. Song says, Renner reported, lowering the comm, that if a net runner just tried to breach you and failed, then 2 things are now true. 1, somebody with real money is already hunting you, because runners of the kind who could find this safe house don't come cheap, which means we're past fixers and scavs now, we're into corp money. He paused. And 2, they just learned the same thing Song and Osei and I already know, that you can't be hacked. Which sounds like good news. His expression said it was anything but. But Song says it's the worst news we could have gotten, because up until an hour ago, whoever's hunting you was probably planning to take you the easy way. Reach in through the net, shut you down clean, scoop you up unconscious, no fuss. That's off the table now, permanently. They know the net won't work on you. He met the boy's eyes. So they're going to come the other way. The way this city uses when hacking fails and buying fails and everything clean fails. He picked the pistol back up. They're going to send people, real people, with real guns in real numbers, and they are going to keep sending them, more each time, better each time, until they have you, or until they've thrown the whole weight of a corporation at the problem. The runner failing didn't save you, kid. It just told them what kind of war this is going to be, and it's the kind they always win. Izuku Midoriya looked at the wall of the safe house, in the direction his strange sense had pointed, toward the cold room across the city, where a defeated genius sat unplugging his useless tools. He didn't feel triumphant. He understood, now, the way Song had tried to make him understand, that in Night City, every strength was just information the enemy used to choose a sharper knife. His unhackability wasn't a shield. It was a message he'd just involuntarily sent to the people hunting him, and the message was, you'll have to do this the bloody way. And somewhere out there, they were reading it, and nodding, and picking up the phone. The gig was supposed to be simple, and Izuku had almost talked himself into believing that made it safe. It didn't. Nothing in Night City was safe, and a gig least of all, but Miss Song had laid out the logic with her usual flat precision, and the logic held. The safe house was burned, the netrunner's failed breach meant Corp Money knew roughly where he was, and staying put was a slow death. He needed to move deeper into the city, into places money could buy silence, and money was the one thing he didn't have. Renner was tapped out, an old merc living gig to gig. Song didn't do charity, favor to Renner or not. She'd bankroll a relocation, but she'd want it worked off, because a fixer who gave things away for free wasn't a fixer for very long. So there was a gig, one clean job, off the books, paying enough to vanish him into the mid-city sprawl for a month, while he hunted the way home, in and out, no spectacle. Song had picked it herself, specifically because it was quiet. It was a data grab, a mid-tier corpo type named Weller, some middle management functionary at a subsidiary Song didn't name, had skimmed something he shouldn't have. A data shard full of embezzlement records he was holding as insurance against his own employers. Song's client wanted the shard. The job was to get into Weller's apartment while he was out, crack his safe, take the shard and leave, and it paid stupidly well, because the client was in a hurry, and the apartment was in a decent building, with decent security, that a washed-up merc and an unhackable kid could, between them, handle. Renner would run Overwatch and crack the safe. Izuku was muscle, and away past the physical security. Nothing more. You do not fight anyone, Song had said. You do not save anyone. You get in, you get the shard, you get out, and you become a ghost with the money. That is the entire job. Can you do that? Izuku had said yes, and had meant it, and had believed it, right up until the moment it stopped being true. The building was a converted commercial tower in the northern reaches of Watson's Better Edge, the kind of place where people who'd almost made it out of the zone lived while pretending they already had. Renner got them past the lobby with a forged credential and a bored night clerk who didn't look up. The elevator was clean. The hallway on the 31st floor was quiet, carpeted, lined with identical doors behind which identical mid-tier lives were being lived. Weller's door yielded to Renner's bypass tools in under a minute, and then they were inside, in a dark apartment that smelled of synth food and cheap cologne, and everything was going exactly to plan. Safes in the bedroom, behind the mirror, Song's intel says. Renner moved with the quiet economy of a man who'd done this 100 times, his cracked karoshi sweeping the dark. You stay here, watch the door, don't touch anything. This is the easy part. I crack it, we walk. 15 minutes, we're eating noodles somewhere nice, and you're a month closer to home. Izuku nodded and took up a position by the door, and for about 90 seconds it was in fact the easy part. Then he heard the crying. It was faint, so faint that no unaugmented ear would have caught it. But Izuku's hearing was not unaugmented, and the sound cut through the apartment's silence like a wire. A child, somewhere below them, muffled by a floor, the specific broken rhythm of a small child crying, the way children cried when they'd been crying a long time, and had given up expecting anyone to come. Izuku's whole body oriented toward it before his conscious mind had caught up, the way it had oriented toward the girl in the alley, the way it always did. Renner, he said quietly, there's a kid, a floor down, crying. There's a lot of things in this building, kid. Renner's voice drifted back from the bedroom, focused on the safe. None of them are our problem. Watch the door. Izuku watched the door. He tried. He genuinely tried. And this was the part that would matter later, when he turned it over in his mind. That he tried. That he stood there for another full minute with his hands at his sides, telling himself that Song was right, that the job was the job. That saving one crying child on one floor of one building in a city with 10 million suffering people was a drop in an ocean of drops. That his own survival and the way home, and every person waiting for him in his own world depended on him being, for one single night, the kind of person who could walk past a crying child. Then the crying changed. It went sharp, a spike of real fear, a child's voice rising into something that wasn't just sadness anymore. And under it, threaded through it, Izuku heard the low, ugly sound of an adult voice, and the specific wet impact of a hand on a body, and the child's cry cut off into a whimper, and something in Izuku Midoriya that was older and deeper than any strategy simply took the decision out of his hands. He was gone before Renner finished turning around. He didn't use the door. He put his hand flat against the floor and pushed, a controlled burst of full cowling, green lightning crawling up his arm, and the ferroconcrete gave way beneath him in a clean 2-meter circle, and he dropped through into the apartment below in a shower of dust and rebar. It was the opposite of quiet. It was the loudest possible thing he could have done, and he did it anyway. Because a floor away a child was being hurt, and the math that told him to walk past had stopped being math he could do. The apartment below was a small, ugly space, and in it was a man. Big, chromed, mean, a mid-level ganger of some kind. The details didn't matter. And a child of maybe 6, pressed into a corner with a fresh mark rising on her small face, and the child's mother on the floor between them with her arm up, and the whole tableau of a private horror interrupted at the worst possible moment by a boy falling through the ceiling wrapped in green lightning. The ganger reacted the way chromed men in Night City reacted to surprises. He went for a gun. He was fast, reflexes bought and paid for, and in most of the city fast enough. Izuku crossed the room before the gun cleared its holster, caught the man's wrist, and with a care that even now, even furious, he did not abandon, took him off his feet, and put him down against the wall hard enough to end the fight, and not hard enough to end the man. The ganger crumpled, unconscious, chrome and all. The child stared, the mother stared, and Izuku knelt down, made himself small and gentle, and asked the little girl if she was okay. In the same voice he'd used on Nadia in the alley, the voice that did not belong in this city. He got her to a neighbor. He made sure the mother could stand. He did all of it in maybe 4 minutes, and every second of those 4 minutes he knew, in the cold back of his mind, exactly what he was doing to the gig, and he did it anyway, because the alternative was not a thing he was capable of. When he came back up through the hole he'd made, Renner was standing in the middle of Weller's apartment with the safe open, the data shard in his hand, and an expression on his tired face that was equal parts fury, and something that looked, terribly, like grief. "It's blown," Renner said. He held up the shard. "I got this. Doesn't matter. You put a hole in the building, kid. You dropped a floor. Somebody called it in the second you did. The clerk downstairs. A neighbor. Somebody. NCPD won't come. This isn't a neighborhood they bother with. But Weller's building has a private response contract, and that response is already rolling. And worse than that. He tapped his ear, the comm feeding him bad news in real time. Song's client just pulled out. The whole point of this job was quiet. A ghost job. Nobody ever knows it happened. And you just announced it to the entire block with a superhuman entrance that's going to be all over the local net within the hour. Green lightning. Kid punching through floors. That's you. That's a signature. That's the exact thing Song told you never to do again, and you did it. On the one night we needed you invisible to stop one gonk from smacking a kid around. He was hurting a child, Izuku said, quietly, not defensive, just stating the fact that had governed everything. I heard her. I couldn't. I know. And that was the worst part. The part that made Renner's fury collapse into that awful grief. Because he did know. He'd known from the moment he met the kid that this exact thing was going to happen eventually. That it was written into the boy as deep as the strength was. I know you couldn't. That's the whole problem. That's the thing this city is going to use to destroy you, kid. And you can't even see it. Because to you it's not a weakness. It's the entire point of you. He sank down onto the arm of Weller's couch, suddenly looking every one of his 50 years. Let me explain to you what you just did, because you need to understand it. And I need you to actually hear me this time. You saved that little girl. Good. That's a real thing. And it matters. And I'm not going to stand here and tell you it doesn't. But, he held up the shard. The job's blown. Song's client is gone. Which means there's no money. Which means there's no relocation. No month in mid-city. No vanishing into the deep sprawl where they can't find you. You're staying in Watson. Exposed. Burned. For who knows how long. Because the payday that was going to move you just evaporated. And you did that trade. A safe future for yourself. A real shot at getting home. For 4 minutes of stopping one man from hitting one kid. When in this city there are 10,000 men hitting 10,000 kids right now. Tonight. And you can't save any of the others. And the one you saved is going to get hit again next week by someone else. Because the thing that hurts her isn't that one man. It's the whole city. And you can't punch the city. His voice cracked. That's the trap. That's the Night City trap. And it's got you. And it's going to keep having you. Because every single time this city puts a hurting kid in front of you, you're going to make the same trade. And the trades are going to get more expensive. And one day the price is going to be your life. And you're going to pay it. For someone who'll be dead or broken again a week later anyway. That's what it does to people like you. It takes the best thing about you and it turns it into the lever that kills you. The apartment was silent. Somewhere far below, the private security response was arriving, and they had minutes, maybe less, and both of them knew it. Izuku Midoriya stood in the wreckage of the blown gig and listened to the truest and most cynical thing anyone had ever said to him, and felt the full weight of it, because he wasn't stupid and it wasn't wrong. Renner was right. Every word of it was right. He had traded his shot at home for 4 minutes. The girl he'd saved was one of 10,000. And the city that hurt her would hurt her again, and he couldn't punch the city, and one day this exact instinct probably would get him killed. He knew all of that. He'd known it, in some form, his whole life. All Might had once nearly died saving him, and Izuku had spent years learning that heroism cost, that it wasn't free, that the accounts didn't balance, and the good you did was always smaller than the ocean of harm you couldn't touch, and he'd chosen it anyway. Every time. He would choose it every time. You're right, Izuku said. And then, quietly, with a certainty that wasn't defiance but was somehow worse than defiance. Because defiance could be argued with and this couldn't. You're right about all of it. The job's blown. The money's gone. I made everything harder. I probably shortened my own life. And the girl I saved is one of 10,000, and I can't save the others, and the city will hurt her again. He met Renner's eyes. But when I was standing up there watching the door, and I heard her, I ran the exact math you just said. All of it, in about 1 second. Walk past. Keep the job. Get home. It's just one kid. You can't save them all. I ran it. And then I broke through the floor anyway. Because there's a version of getting home. Of surviving. Of being smart about this city. where I have to become the kind of person who can hear a child being hurt one room away and keep watching a door. And I would rather not get home than become that person. He said it simply, without heat, like a man reporting the weather. I know what it costs. I've always known what it costs. Where I'm from, we have a saying, that a hero is someone who steps in when it's hard, when it's stupid, when the math says don't. If I only saved people when it was free and safe and convenient, I wouldn't be a hero. I'd just be strong. And this city has enough strong people. It doesn't have enough of the other thing. Renner stared at him for a long moment. Something moved behind the old merc's cracked optic. A complicated grief, an old wound, the ghost of a younger man who might once have thought the same way before 50 years of Night City ground it out of him. Yeah, he said finally, very quietly. It sure doesn't. He stood, joints popping, and pocketed the useless shard, and jerked his head toward the door. Response team's on the stairs. We go now, or we don't go. And kid, he paused, and there was something almost like tenderness under the exhaustion. For what it's worth, I've watched a lot of people in this city do a lot of things. I've never once watched somebody make the trade you just made. Not once in 50 years. He almost smiled. It's the stupidest thing I've ever seen. And I've been sitting here for 4 minutes, trying to figure out why it's making me feel something I stopped feeling a long time ago. And I think it's because I forgot that trade was even possible. This city teaches you it isn't, and then you drop through a ceiling and remind me it is. He opened the door. Come on. Let's get you out of here before the trade costs even more than it already has. We'll figure the money out. We always figure the money out. That's the one thing this city's good at teaching you. They went out into the stairwell and down, past the arriving response team by a margin of seconds, out into the neon rain of a city that had just shown Izuku Midoriya, in miniature, the exact shape of the choice it was going to keep putting in front of him for as long as he stayed. And Izuku walked out into it having chosen, already, how he was going to answer, the same way, every time, no matter the cost, because that was the thing about him the city hadn't understood yet, the thing Arasaka's strategist had flagged from 93 floors up, the thing that made him valuable, and the thing that made him doomed, and the thing that was, in the end, the same thing. He couldn't be bought, he couldn't be hacked, and he couldn't, would never, walk past a crying child. Night City was about to learn what the last one cost, and what it was worth. The extraction order came down at 3:47 in the morning, which was when Arasaka preferred to do these things, because the small hours were when the city's guard was lowest, and its witnesses were fewest, and its response times were slowest, and because a corporation that had killed more people than most wars had learned, over 200 years, exactly when the world was least inclined to notice. Hanako Yorinobu signed it from her office on the 93rd floor, without any particular feeling. The tell she'd been waiting for had arrived. 2 of them, in fact, stacked. The Netrunner's report had confirmed the boy was unhackable, which closed the clean option and meant any acquisition would have to be physical. And then the incident in the residential tower, the hole punched through a floor, the green lightning, the superhuman signature splashed across the local net within the hour, exactly as the fixer had feared, had confirmed something the strategist had predicted, and Hanako had filed away as a lever. The boy could not stop himself from intervening. He'd blown his own carefully arranged escape to save a single child. That was not a weakness in the ordinary sense. It was better than a weakness. It was a behavior, predictable and repeatable. And predictable, repeatable behavior was the thing Arasaka built its entire operational doctrine around. Because a thing that behaves predictably is a thing you can plan around, corner, and take. More urgently, the local net splash meant the secret was widening. Other eyes were on Watson now. Militech monitored the same feeds Arasaka did. A fixer in Kang Tao's pocket might already be pricing a whisper. The strategist's patience had bought Arasaka 2 days of watching, and those 2 days had been valuable. They'd mapped the boy's associates, his safe house, his fixer, his merc handler, his patterns. But patience had a shelf life, and the moment the wider city started noticing was the moment patience became recklessness. Hanako had told the room she'd move the instant she detected another buyer moving on him. She'd been generous with herself. She moved on the risk of one. She signed the order. Colonel Voight had the team ready before the ink was dry, because Voight had had the team ready for 2 days, straining at the leash. and the signature was the only thing he'd been waiting for. It was not, whatever the strategist had feared, a subtle team. Voight had listened to the philosophy in the conference room. The he holds back, he can be reasoned with, restraint is available to him, and Voight had drawn from it the opposite conclusion the strategist intended. If the boy held back, that was the boy's problem, and Voight would use it. Voight himself would not hold back at all. He'd assembled an acquisition package built to overwhelm, not a snatch team but a small army, 16 operators, Arasaka's best wetwork specialists, chromed to the edge of psychosis, and disciplined enough to walk right up to that edge without going over. They came in armored AVs with the running lights killed, and they carried a loadout designed around a single, chilling premise. The target cannot be hacked, so we do this the old way. And the old way is overwhelming physical force applied faster than a human can respond. Non-lethal primary, Haneko's order had specified. Voight had interpreted that with a soldier's creativity. Non-lethal, yes. A saturation of tranq rounds, sonic disruptors, a Militech pattern net gun firing monofilament restraints, gas, tangle foam grenades that could immobilize a full Borg. But the contingency loadout on every operator's back was very lethal indeed, because Voight had read the same footage everyone had read, and Voight was not a man who walked into a fight with a thing that caught bullets barehanded while betting his life on non-lethal primary. Take him alive if possible. Take him regardless. Those were the actual orders, whatever the paperwork said. They hit the safe house at 4:19 in the morning, and they hit it the way Arasaka hit everything. All at once, from every direction, with no warning and no mercy, and no fair fight anywhere in the plan. Izuku was awake. He'd been awake for an hour, because his danger sense had been building for that long. Not the sharp spike of an ambush yet, but the slow rising pressure of a threat assembling itself somewhere out in the dark, converging, getting closer, and he'd learned over a lifetime to trust that feeling absolutely. He'd woken Renner, he'd woken Song, who kept a room in the same building, and so when the assault came, it did not catch 3 sleeping people, it caught 3 people already braced, already moving, which was the only reason the next several minutes went the way they did, instead of ending in the first 10 seconds. The wall came in first, not the door, the wall, a whole section of it blown inward by a shaped breaching charge, and through the gap came the tangle foam and the gas and the first wave of operators, and the room dissolved into chaos and smoke and the strobe of muzzle flashes throwing tranq rounds. Renner was already firing from cover, old chrome and old instincts, dropping the first operator through the gap with a headshot before the man had fully cleared the breach, and taking a tranq round in the shoulder for it, staggering, the drug hitting his 50-year-old system hard. Song was gone, out a back route she'd prepared in advance because Song always prepared a back route, moving to a position where a fixer could do what a fixer did, which was watch and calculate and survive. And Izuku moved into the center of it, and the room learned what everyone kept learning about him. The tranq rounds came at him in a swarm, a saturation designed to overwhelm reaction speed, and his reaction speed was faster than a maxed-out Sandevistan at rest. And now it was not at rest. Green lightning flared across his whole body, full cowling snapping to life, and the world slowed to the crawl it always slowed to when he opened himself all the way up. He saw the tranq rounds in the air, actually saw them, individual darts hanging in the smoke, and he moved between them, a controlled violence of speed, and where he couldn't avoid them they hit and skidded off skin that a smart slug hadn't been able to penetrate. The net gun fired its monofilament restraints and he caught the net out of the air and it did nothing. The filament that could hold a full Borg simply not strong enough for hands that folded industrial polymer. The tangle foam grenades detonated and he was already out of their radius, having read the throws, having felt the danger of them a half-second before they left the operator's hands. Voss had been the scavenger. This was a different kind of professional entirely. The team leader. A scarred woman named Cade who'd run wet work for Arasaka for 15 years and had never once failed to bring back what she was sent for, watched her opening saturation fail against the target, and did not panic. Because panicking was for amateurs, she adjusted. She'd planned for this. The saturation wasn't meant to take him. It was meant to fix him, to force him to react defensively, and lock him into one spot, while the real trap closed. And the real trap was the second wave. 8 more operators coming in through 3 more breaches simultaneously, boxing him, and a pair of specialists deploying the thing Voight had built specifically for a target like this. It was a containment field generator, a heavy, tripod-mounted device that projected a dome of oscillating force, a piece of Arasaka black tech designed to hold things the Corp didn't understand, the same class of device that had once, in a buried incident nobody talked about, briefly contained something that came through the black wall. It wouldn't stop him from moving inside the dome. It was meant to stop him from leaving it, to trap him in a bounded space where the team could work him over with everything they had until attrition, exhaustion, or the lethal contingency finally brought him down. And here was the moment the whole thing turned, the moment that mattered, because this was the moment Izuku had a choice. He could have run. In the half-second before the containment field snapped up, with his speed and his strength, he could have gone straight up through the ceiling and out and away, left the safe house and the operators and the trap behind, and probably made it, and been free, and been alone. Song was already clear. But Renner was down, tranked, staggering, being closed on by 2 operators who had orders to remove anyone protecting the asset, and remove in Arasaka's operational vocabulary did not mean arrest. Renner, who'd helped him for free. Renner, who'd told him the trap was coming, and walked into it beside him anyway. Izuku chose Renner. He crossed the room in a green blur, put himself between the old merc and the 2 operators, took the burst of live rounds they fired, because they'd switched to lethal the instant the non-lethal package failed, exactly as Voight had planned, took them across his back and shoulders where they cracked and flattened against skin, and got Renner behind him. And in doing it, in choosing to plant himself and protect rather than run, he stayed in the one spot long enough for the containment field to snap up around him, a shimmering dome of force sealing him and Renner and 4 operators inside a bounded arena, cutting off the sky. Kate allowed herself a thin flicker of satisfaction. There, the strategist had been right about one thing, and Kate had built her plan on it. The boy would not leave someone behind. Give him someone to protect and he'd anchor himself to defend them. And an anchored target was a contained target. And a contained target was a dead or captured one. The whole operation had been engineered around a single insight. His goodness is a handle, and the handle had just worked exactly as designed. Inside the dome, Izuku set Renner down against the intact stretch of wall, shielding him with his own body, and looked out through the shimmering field at the operators surrounding him, at the muzzles pointed inward, at the woman coordinating it all with cold competence, and understood the trap completely. He'd been read. His one non-negotiable, protect the person who helped you, had been the exact lever they'd pulled, and it had worked, and he was boxed, and Renner was hurt and slowing, and a liability he would not abandon, and there were 16 professionals with lethal loadouts, and a piece of black tech built to hold things worse than him, and the sky was gone. And Izuku Midoriya, boxed in a dome of Arasaka force with a wounded old man at his back, and a corporation's best killers all around him, did the thing that made him what he was. He smiled, small, tired, and utterly without fear, because he'd been in traps before, he'd been in worse. And the people who built traps for him always made the same mistake. They built the trap around what he could do, the strength, the speed, the durability, the things their instruments could measure. And they never, ever accounted for the other thing, the thing Osei's scans couldn't find, and Glitch's daemons couldn't touch, and Arasaka's strategist had flagged and been overruled on. They didn't account for the fact that a boy who would burn his own escape to save one stranger was a boy who did not calculate his own survival the way they calculated it, who had, packed inside him alongside all that measurable power, a bottomless, unmeasurable willingness to keep going that no containment field was built to hold. You built this to hold something strong, Izuku said, to no one and everyone, and green lightning began to climb his arms, brighter than the operators had yet seen it, brighter than the footage had shown. One for all, winding up past the percentages he used for restraint, toward the percentages he used when it truly mattered. You did your homework, you know how strong I am. The lightning reached his eyes. You just don't know why. He moved. And the containment field, and the 4 operators inside it, and Cade's 15-year unbroken record, and Colonel Voight's careful, overwhelming plan, All met the part of Izuku Midoriya that his enemies never, ever saw coming until it was on top of them. Not the strength which they'd measured, but the will driving it. The thing that made a boy who could have run choose instead to plant his feet in front of a wounded stranger and refuse, with everything in him, to lose. The dome flared white. Something inside it screamed. A man's voice, cut short. And on the monitors in the AV outside, watching the operation with the flat attention of a man reviewing an investment, Colonel Voight saw the containment field's power readings spike into red and hold there, straining, as something inside it that his black tech had been built to hold began, impossibly, to push back. Voight keyed his comm. "Cade," he said. "Status." Static answered him, then Cade's voice, and for the first time in the 15 years Voight had known her, it was not calm. "The field's failing," she said. Colonel, he's breaking the containment field. From the inside. Nothing does that. That's rated for." A sound of tearing force, a concussion that whited out the audio. When it cleared, Cade's voice came back thinner, faster, the voice of a professional watching her plan come apart in her hands. 4 operators down inside the dome. Non-lethal. He's still not killing them. He could be, but he isn't. He's just taking them apart and setting them down. "Colonel, we planned for a fight. This isn't a fight. He's walking through us, and he's being gentle about it, and I need the contingency. I need Smasher tier. This team cannot hold him. Nothing I have can hold him." Voight was quiet for a moment, in the dark of the AV, watching the containment field's readings finally gutter and die on his monitor, as somewhere in the ruined safe house, a dome of Arasaka's finest black tech came apart at the hands of a boy who could have run and chose to stay. He'd been told, the strategist had told the whole room, 2 days ago, on the 93rd floor. "You have no institutional idea what to do with a genuinely good person, who cannot be bought, cannot be hacked, and cannot be intimidated." Voigt had heard it as philosophy, as the caution of a cautious woman, and he'd built his overwhelming plan anyway, confident that enough force applied fast enough could take anything. And it could. It could take almost anything. But it turned out that the one thing 16 operators in a containment field couldn't take was a thing that didn't care about its own survival, the way everything else in Night City cared about its own survival. A thing that would stand in a collapsing trap and refuse to fall because someone it had decided to protect was still breathing behind it. Voight was a professional, and professionals adapt, and there was exactly one asset left in Arasaka's inventory built for a target that broke containment fields and walked through 16 operators without killing a single one of them. It was expensive. It was rarely deployed. It had killed Johnny Silverhand, and it had killed better mercs than had ever walked into that safe house. And it did not hold back, ever, for anyone. And it did not care in the slightest whether its target was a good person or a bad one, because it had stopped being able to tell the difference a very long time ago. Voight keyed a different channel, a priority line, one he'd been authorized to open only if the primary team failed, one that connected to a chassis rather than a man. "This is Voight. Wetwork acquisition. Authorization confirmed," he said. "Primary team is compromised. Target exceeds all containment. I'm activating the contingency." He watched the last of his operators' vitals flicker on the monitor. Down, all of them, but alive. Every one of them alive, which was somehow the most unnerving detail of the entire disaster. "Deploy Smasher. Full authorization. Lethal sanctioned. Bring me the target, or bring me the body. He's chosen to protect the old man and the Fixer's people. He won't run while they're in danger. Use that. It's the only handle he has." The channel acknowledged with a single flat tone, the sound of a contract being accepted by a thing that had stopped needing words. And across the water, in a hangar in a corporate tower, something enormous and patient, and made almost entirely of metal, opened its optics in the dark, and received its target, and began, without hurry and without doubt, to move. Atom Smasher did not sleep, because Atom Smasher had not been the kind of thing that slept for a very long time. He waited, instead, in a reinforced hangar bay 80 floors up in Arasaka Tower, in a cradle built to hold 2.5 tons of full conversion cyborg, and in the long empty hours between contracts he did approximately nothing, because there was almost nothing left in him that wanted anything. There had been a man once. His name had been Adam Smasher, and he'd been a merc like any other, until an injury and a series of choices had started the long, slow trade of flesh for chrome, and he'd kept trading, kept replacing, kept climbing toward the thing he wanted to be, until there was no flesh left to trade, and no man left to want anything, except the one appetite that had survived every replacement, the pure, uncomplicated pleasure of killing things that other things could not kill. He was Arasaka's apex, their guard dog, the final answer to any question that ended in a body. He had killed Johnny Silverhand during the nuking of the old tower. He had killed the edgerunner Maine and later the boy David Martinez in his Sandevistan glory, and dozens of legends between and since, and every one of them had died the same way, believing, right up until the end, that they were fast enough, or strong enough, or clever enough, and being wrong. The contract came in at 4:41 in the morning, and it woke the one appetite that still worked. Voight's briefing was efficient. Target, unhackable, unchromed, superhuman, breaks containment fields, walks through wetwork teams. Origin, unknown, possibly Blackwall adjacent, definitely not from here. Behavioral note flagged in red. Target consistently refrains from lethal force and will anchor himself to protect others rather than flee. Smasher read the last part with what, in a thing that still had a face, might have been a smile. In a thing that didn't, it was just a slight shift in the set of the great chrome skull. Everyone he'd ever killed had a handle. Silverhand's had been his own arrogance. Maine's had been his crew. David's had been the girl. This one's was written right there in the briefing in plain corporate language. Anchors himself to protect others. Good. Smasher had spent decades killing people through the people they loved. It was, when you got down to it, the only reliable weakness the strong ones ever had. He deployed by AV, dropped onto the roof of the shattered residential block where the wetwork team had failed, and he came down through the building the way a wrecking ball comes down through a building. Not fast, he was never especially fast, but inevitable. 2.5 tons of layered composite armor and military chrome descending floor by floor, with a tread that made the whole structure shudder. He didn't need speed. Speed was for things that could be hurt. Smasher was the immovable object that had learned to walk, and everything he'd ever hunted had eventually run out of the one thing they had over him, which was the ability to keep moving, because Smasher never got tired, and Smasher never stopped, and Smasher was already, always, exactly where you were going to be. Izuku felt him coming from 4 floors up. He'd gotten Renner clear of the safe house, had the old merc slung over one shoulder, tranked and fading but alive, moving through the wreckage toward one of Song's back routes with the fixer's voice in his ear guiding him, when his danger sense did something it had never done before. It didn't spike, it screamed. It went from the background hum of an ongoing threat to a full, blaring, whole-body alarm unlike anything he'd felt since the worst moments of the worst war of his life. A warning so total that he stopped dead in his tracks, and Renner, half-conscious on his shoulder, felt him go rigid. "What?" Renner slurred. "What is it?" "Something's coming," Izuku said, and his voice was very quiet. "Something big. My whole body is telling me to run. It doesn't usually get this loud." Song's voice cut in through the comm, and it too was different. The flat professional comm gone thin. "I'm reading a deployment off the tower. Priority channel, black authorization. Boy, listen to me very carefully. There is exactly one thing Arasaka sends when a full wetwork team fails, and if that's what your alarm is screaming about, then you need to do the thing you have never once done since you got here. You need to run, not fight. Run. Leave the building, leave the district, leave everything, and run, because the thing coming up those stairs is the reason legends in this city are past tense." "What is it?" Izuku asked. "Adam Smasher," Song said, and even through a comm, even flattened by transmission, the name carried a weight that made the hair on Izuku's neck rise. "A full conversion cyborg, 2.5 tons. There is no flesh left in it, nothing you can appeal to, nothing that will hesitate, nothing that will hold back the way you hold back. It killed the greatest rocker boy this city ever produced. It killed a kid with a Sandevistan, who moved faster than you can imagine. It has killed everyone who has ever tried to fight it instead of run from it. Its whole existence is being the thing the strongest fighter in the room can't beat. And it is coming for you, specifically, because you broke the containment field, which means someone has decided you're worth the most expensive death in Night City. Her voice hardened. So run. Get Renner to the extraction point. Put him down and run. Because you cannot carry a wounded man and fight that thing at the same time. And it knows that. It was told that. It is counting on you being too good to drop him. And there it was again, the handle. The same handle the wetwork team had used. The same handle Arasaka had identified 2 days ago and built 2 separate operations around. He anchors himself to protect others. Izuku understood it now with total clarity, that his one absolute, the thing he would not compromise, had become the single most reliable weapon his enemies had, the lever they pulled every single time, and that the thing coming up the stairs had been pointed at that lever like a gun. He set Renner down. Not to abandon him. Izuku Midoriya did not abandon people. That was the whole problem. But because Song was right about the mechanics of it, and because there was a version of this where he could satisfy both his nature and the tactics, and he found it fast, the way he'd always been able to find the shape of a fight faster than anyone expected. Song, is there a way out for Renner that doesn't need me carrying him? A route he can crawl, a drop, anything? Yes, Song said, after a half-second's calculation. 2 floors down, east side, there's a maintenance chute to the sublevel. He can make it if he's conscious enough. Barely. Then get him talking. Keep him awake. Rout him out. Izuku knelt by the fading old merc and gripped his shoulder. Renner, you have to move on your own. I can't carry you and do what I'm about to do. There's a chute 2 floors down. Song's going to talk you to it. Can you make it? Renner's cracked karoshi focused on him with effort. Kid, don't. Whatever you're thinking. That thing. Nobody fights Smasher. Nobody. You run. You hear me? You run. I'm going to buy you time to get to the chute, Izuku said gently. That's all. And then, I'm going to do exactly what I've been doing since I got here, which is the thing everyone keeps telling me not to do. He almost smiled. Go, Renner. Please. I can't fight it right if I'm worried about you. Take the handle away from them. That's how I win this. Not by being strong enough, but by making sure the thing they're using against me is gone. And Renner, because he was 50 years old and out of options, and because there was something in the boy's face that he'd stopped arguing with, dragged himself up and began the long crawl toward the chute, with Song's voice in his ear, and left Izuku Midoriya alone at the top of a stairwell to meet the thing that killed legends. Smasher arrived a floor below and stopped, and looked up through the gap Izuku had blown earlier that same night, the hole the boy had punched to save a child, the hole that had started this whole cascade. And the 2 of them regarded each other across 4 meters of ruined ferroconcrete and dust-hazed air. Izuku saw a nightmare, 2.5 tons of matte dark chrome, a hulking silhouette that filled the stairwell, a skull-like head with a single cold sensor slit of red light, where eyes should be, arms that ended in weapon systems, a body from which every trace of the human it had once been had been methodically, deliberately erased. It didn't breathe, it didn't shift its weight, it just stood, and looked at him, and radiated the particular stillness of a thing that has never once in its existence been afraid, because it has never once met anything it needed to be afraid of. Smasher saw a boy, small, unarmored, green-haired, freckled, with a body his sensors read as empty, no chrome, no tech, no target lock handshake, a null, exactly as the briefing said. And Smasher, who had killed the fastest and the strongest and the cleverest that Night City had ever produced, felt the one thing that still functioned in him stir. Not fear. He had no fear, but interest. The flicker of appetite at the prospect of something genuinely new to kill. It had been a long time since anything was new. They tell me, Smasher said, and his voice was a low mechanical grind, dredged up from somewhere deep in the chassis, the voice of a thing that rarely bothered to speak. You don't kill. That you put my whole team down and let every one of them live. The red sensor slit brightened fractionally. That's the stupidest thing I ever heard. You had 16 pros in a kill box and you let them walk? Something that might once have been contempt colored the grind. That's why you're gonna die here, kid. Not 'cause you're weak. You're not weak. I can see that. You're the realest thing they've thrown at me in years. You're gonna die 'cause you care about something. Everyone I ever killed cared about something. It's the only way to kill your kind. Find the thing you won't drop, and push on it till you break. You're the strongest thing in this city, Izuku said quietly. It wasn't a question. His danger sense had already told him. This was the apex, the real one, the thing his whole body was built to warn him away from. I'm the last thing in this city, Smasher corrected. The strong ones, the fast ones, the smart ones. They all come through eventually, and they all meet me, and then they're gone, and I'm still here. That's what I am. I'm the end. Then they met me. The great chrome frame shifted, finally, weight coming forward. Weapon systems in the arms cycling up with a rising whine. You broke a containment field they built to hold a god. I'm gonna enjoy this. Been a while since I got to try. And Izuku Midoriya, alone at the top of a stairwell, with the person he'd been protecting finally clear and safe, and the handle taken out of his enemy's hands, looked at the thing that had killed every legend Night City ever made, and reached down into the core of himself, into One for All, and the will of every person who'd carried it before him, and began to wind it up, past the percentages of restraint, past the numbers he'd used on the scavengers and the wetwork team, up toward the ceiling of everything he had, because his danger sense was not screaming at him for nothing, because Song did not use the word legends lightly, because the red light in the skull across from him belonged to a thing that had never lost. Green lightning erupted across his entire body, brighter than it had been all night, brighter than the footage, brighter than anything Night City had recorded. Full cowling at a percentage he saved for the moments that decided everything, his muscles singing with stockpiled power, the air around him beginning to distort with the heat of it, the whole ruined stairwell lighting up emerald. You're right, Izuku said, and his voice was steady, and something in it made even Atom Smasher's ancient appetite pause for a fraction of a second. I care about something. I care about a lot of things. That's not my weakness. The lightning reached its peak, and his eyes blazed, and every stockpiled ounce of the power passed down to him through generations came online at once. It's the reason I'm still standing when everyone tells me to run. You've killed people who cared about something, and you found their handle, and you broke them. He set his feet, and the ferroconcrete cracked beneath them, and he looked the apex of Night City dead in its single red eye. But you've never killed someone who was made out of caring about something. Where I'm from, that's not the weakness in a hero. He vanished, moved, faster than the red sensor could track, green lightning tearing across the gap. It's the whole power. And a boy made of pure flesh and unbreakable will met 2.5 tons of the deadliest chrome in Night City in a collapsing stairwell 80 floors up, and the impact of them coming together blew out every remaining window on the floor and lit the pre-dawn dark over Watson with a flash of green that people 3 districts away would swear. For years afterward, they had seen. The night the thing that couldn't be killed met the boy who wouldn't stop, and the whole rigged game of Night City held its breath to see, for once, which one of its absolute rules was about to break. The first exchange told Izuku everything he needed to know, and none of it was good. He hit Smasher at a percentage of One for All that would have ended almost anything. A Detroit smash, driven with the full stockpiled strength of every predecessor who'd carried the power before him, delivered at a speed that turned him into a green streak the red sensor slit couldn't follow. It was the kind of blow that shattered concrete like glass, that had cracked the sky in his own world, that no ordinary durability could weather. It landed square on the great chrome chest with a concussion that blew out the floor and drove Atom Smasher backward through a load-bearing wall and into the next room, and through that wall too, a 2.5-ton mass hurled like a thrown car, and for one bright instant Izuku thought, maybe. Then Smasher stood up out of the rubble, and he was not damaged, and the red light in his skull was, if anything, brighter. There it is, Smasher grated, brushing ferroconcrete dust off armor that showed a dent. One dent, shallow, in composite plating, rated to shrug off tank rounds. That's the real thing. That's a hit. Haven't taken one like that since. The grind of his voice did something that might have been a laugh. Doesn't matter. They're all dead. Do it again, kid. Harder. Let's see the top of it. And that was the horror of Atom Smasher. The thing Song had tried to warn him about. The thing that made him the last thing in Night City. He was built, from the ground up, to take the best hit the strongest thing in the room had, and keep coming. Every legend who'd fought him had led with their finest blow, and their finest blow had done what Izuku's had just done. Hurt him, dented him, staggered him, and not stopped him, and then they'd had nothing bigger, and Smasher had had all the time in the world, and Smasher had won. He didn't need to be as strong as his opponent. He needed to be strong enough to survive their strongest, and durable enough to outlast it, and patient enough to wait for the moment their strength ran out or their attention slipped. And then he needed to be there, immovable, at the end of it, which he always was. Izuku understood the shape of the fight in that first exchange, with the terrible clarity his mind always brought to combat. He could hurt Smasher. He probably could not, with a single blow, destroy Smasher. The thing's durability was in a class he'd rarely faced, and to punch through it entirely he'd have to go higher than he'd yet gone, into the percentages that broke his own body. And Smasher didn't have to win any exchange. Smasher only had to survive them, and wait, and take the fight into the long grind where a thing that never tired and never bled and never faltered outlasted a boy who, for all his impossible strength, still had a human body with a human ceiling and human limits that the chrome across from him simply did not share. So Izuku changed the fight, the way he'd learned to change fights his whole life, by outthinking the thing he couldn't outmuscle. He stopped trying to land the one perfect blow. He started using everything. Black Whip erupted from his arm, tendrils of dark energy lashing out to grab a fallen support beam, and he swung himself around Smasher's guard at an angle the cyborg's tracking wasn't built for, striking from behind, from above, from the sides, never where the red sensor expected him. He used Float to take the fight into 3 dimensions, off the floor, denying Smasher the solid ground the heavy chassis relied on. He layered Fajin, storing the kinetic energy of every dodge and building it, releasing it in bursts that hit harder each time. He was faster than Smasher, much faster, and he used that speed not to trade blows, but to make himself an impossible target, a green blur striking from a dozen angles, refusing to be where the guns and the monoblade and the crushing arms could reach him, hammering the dented plate over and over at the exact same spot, trying to turn one dent into a breach through sheer accumulated force. And Smasher, patient, immovable, ancient, let him. That was the second horror. Smasher didn't chase. Smasher planted himself, weathered the storm, tracked the boy with a sensor built to track the fastest solos in the world, and waited, occasionally lashing out with a monoblade that Izuku barely evaded, occasionally firing a burst from an arm-mounted cannon that Izuku had to spend precious speed to avoid, but mostly just taking it, absorbing the accumulating damage, letting the boy pour out his strength against the wall of him. Because Smasher had done this before. Smasher had fought fast, clever, powerful opponents before, and he knew the one truth that governed every one of those fights. The fast ones tire, the clever ones run out of tricks, and I never do. He wasn't trying to win the exchanges. He was trying to reach the end of the boy's stamina, the bottom of his stockpile, the moment when the green lightning flickered from exhaustion, and then he'd stop being patient, and it would be over, the way it was always over. They fought through 3 floors of the collapsing building. Izuku drove Smasher down through weakened floors, using the structure itself as a weapon, dropping the cyborg through level after level and hammering him in the chaos of each collapse. He caught Smasher's monoblade arm in Black Whip and pulled, trying to tear it loose, and the servos screamed and the joints strained and held, because Arasaka had built the thing to be pulled on by exactly this kind of strength. He landed a Manchester smash from directly above, an axe kick carrying his full descending weight and power, and drove Smasher clean through into the sublevels, into a vast, dark parking structure, 80 floors down, where the fight finally hit solid bedrock and could go no lower. And in that dark cavern of concrete pillars and dead vehicles, Izuku Midoriya finally reached the moment every one of Smasher's victims had reached. He was tiring, not badly, not yet, but he could feel it, the edges of his stamina, the slow accumulating cost of running one for all this high for this long, the human ceiling that his opponent did not have. He'd hurt Smasher badly now. The chrome monster's armor was cracked in a dozen places, one optic cluster damaged, one arm hanging slightly wrong. He'd done more damage to Atom Smasher than almost anyone in the thing's long murderous history. And it was not enough, because Smasher was still standing, still tracking, still patient, and the red light still burned, and Izuku understood with cold certainty that he was in the exact trap Smasher built for everyone. He'd spent his best, done his worst, and the thing across from him had survived it and was waiting for him to run dry. Feeling it yet? Smasher grated, from the dark. He'd stopped moving entirely now, just a hulking silhouette between two pillars, dented and cracked and utterly unbothered. Every one of them felt it right about here. The moment they realized they gave me their best and I'm still standing. Silverhand felt it. The Sandevistan kid felt it. That's the moment I like. The moment the strong ones understand that strong was never going to be enough. The monoblade cycled out of his good arm with a hiss. You got maybe 2 more of those big hits in you before your body quits. I got all night. You know how this ends. They always know. Right about here. And Izuku, breathing hard, green lightning guttering slightly around a body pushed near its limit, knew that Smasher was right about the math and wrong about the conclusion. Because Smasher, like Arasaka, like the Wetwork team, like everyone in this city, had built his whole understanding of the fight around what he could measure, and he'd measured Izuku's strength, and Izuku's speed, and Izuku's stamina, and he'd concluded, correctly, that those would run out before his own durability did. What Smasher hadn't measured, because it couldn't be measured, because Osei's scans couldn't find it, and Glitch's daemons couldn't touch it, and no instrument in Night City was built to read it, was the thing Izuku had been telling everyone since he arrived. The strength wasn't the power. The strength was just the tool. The power was the will behind it, the bottomless refusal, the thing that let a boy go past the ceiling of his own body when the moment demanded it, because he had done it before, many times, and every time it had cost him something, and every time he had decided the cost was worth paying. Izuku stopped moving, planted his feet on the bedrock, and began to wind one for all up past the percentage he'd been fighting at, up past his own safe ceiling, up into the numbers that broke bones, the numbers he only ever reached when everything was on the line, when the choice was shatter yourself or lose, and he had, his whole life, chosen to shatter himself. You're right that I'm tired, Izuku said, and his voice was ragged but absolutely certain, and green lightning began to build around him again, brighter than before, brighter than it had any right to be from a body this spent, because it was no longer running on stamina, it was running on the thing underneath stamina, the will that didn't have a fuel gauge. You're right that I gave you my best, and you're still standing. Everyone you've ever killed gave you their best and had nothing left. The lightning climbed past his arms, past his shoulders, wreathing his whole body in searing emerald, and the air in the parking structure began to howl with the pressure of it. But their best came from how strong they were, and when their strength ran out, they had nothing, because strength was all it ever was. His muscles began to tear under the load he was putting on them, and he did not stop, and the pain only made the light brighter. Mine doesn't come from how strong I am. It comes from what I'm for, and that doesn't run out. It can't. It's not a battery. He looked at the thing that killed legends, and he smiled through the pain, blood at the corner of his mouth, green fire in his eyes. So here's your moment, Smasher. The one you like. The moment the strong one realizes strong was never enough. The lightning reached a blinding peak, one for all at 100%, and climbing past it, his whole body screaming, his will refusing. Except I already knew that. I've always known that. Strong was never the point. He moved, and this time even Smasher's sensor lost him entirely. The boy simply gone from where he'd stood, the green light streaking through the dark parking structure in a spiral that built and built, Fa-Jin stacking, full cowling past its ceiling, every ounce of stockpiled power and every generation of will channeling toward a single point on the cracked plate over Atom Smasher's core that Izuku had been hammering all night for exactly this moment. And he drove into it with a blow that had no name yet, a strike carrying 100% and more of one for all and the entire unmeasurable weight of why he was doing it. Everything he was, everyone who'd ever carried the power before him, all of it focused down to a single fist against a single failing point in 2.5 tons of the deadliest chrome Night City had ever built. The parking structure ceased, for a moment, to have any darkness in it at all. The blow landed on the cracked plate, and this time the accumulated damage of the whole long fight, and the impossible force of the strike, met at exactly the right point, and Atom Smasher's core armor, rated to survive a nuke, having survived a nuke, having survived every legend this city ever produced, breached. Not shattered. Smasher was too well made to shatter, but breached, punched through, the composite failing at the one spot Izuku had spent a whole night preparing, the fist driving into the vulnerable systems beneath, and the red sensor slit in the great chrome skull flared white and stuttered. Izuku's body broke in the same instant. He felt his arm go, really go, the bones giving under the load he'd forced through them, the price he'd always known he'd pay coming due exactly on schedule. He didn't care. He'd known the cost and chosen it, the way he always did. Atom Smasher staggered. It was a small thing, and an enormous thing. 2.5 tons of the immovable last thing in Night City took a single lurching step backward, systems sparking through the breach in its core, one arm gone dead, the red light in its skull flickering, and for the first time in a very, very long time, for the first time in longer than most people in Night City had been alive, Atom Smasher was hurt in a way that mattered, hurt at the core, hurt by something that had refused to run out when everything said it should have. Huh, Smasher grated, and his voice was distorted now, damaged, and the appetite in it had been replaced by something almost like the ghost of surprise. Look at that. Went past the top of it. Broke your own body to do it. The flickering red light fixed on the boy standing in front of him, one arm ruined, green lightning still guttering around him, refusing even now to fall. Nobody ever went past the top before. They always stopped when it started to cost them. You didn't stop. Something shifted in the great chrome frame. Systems failing, or a decision being made. Impossible to tell. Maybe that's the difference. Maybe that's the thing I never had a file on. And in the ruined dark of the sublevel, the boy who wouldn't stop and the thing that couldn't be killed faced each other across the wreckage of the most damage either had ever taken, both of them broken in ways they'd never been broken before, and the whole rigged game of Night City hung, for one held breath, on what happened next. For a moment neither of them moved, and the only sound in the ruined sublevel was the sputter of failing systems, and the drip of coolant onto bedrock, and the ragged pull of a boy's breathing. Then Atom Smasher did something that no one who knew him, and there were very few left alive who knew him, would ever have believed. He straightened up out of his stagger, slowly, favoring the dead arm and the breached core, and the red light in his skull steadied, and he looked at the boy standing broken and defiant in front of him, and he did not attack, because Smasher, whatever else the chrome had eaten of him, was still at bottom a professional, and professionals understood cost-benefit better than anyone alive, and Smasher had just run the numbers the way he'd run them 10,000 times. The boy had breached his core, the thing nothing breached. To finish the fight now, damaged as he was, he'd have to go all out against a thing that had just proven it could hurt him at the center, and that had, crucially, broken its own arm doing it, which meant the boy was hurt too, which meant the boy might well have another one of those impossible strikes in him, and might well have nothing, and Smasher genuinely could not tell which, and Atom Smasher had not survived 2 centuries of killing legends by taking fights where he couldn't read the odds. More than that, and this was the part Smasher himself didn't fully examine, the part that lived in whatever was left of him under all the chrome. The fight had satisfied something. The one appetite that still worked in him had been fed, fully, for the first time in years. He'd wanted something new to kill. He'd gotten something new, and it had turned out to be something he maybe couldn't kill, not without a cost he wasn't sure he wanted to pay. And for a thing as old and empty as Smasher, that was rarer and more interesting than a victory. Arasaka's paying me to bring you in, or bring you down, Smasher grated, and coolant hissed through the breach in his chest. And right now, I'm looking at maybe an even money shot at doing either, against a thing that punched through my core, and might have another one of those in the tank. The red light regarded Izuku. That's not a contract, that's a coin flip. I don't do coin flips, I'm the sure thing. That's the whole point of me. Something in the mechanical grind shifted, not warmth, Smasher had no warmth, but a kind of ancient professional recognition. You held back on my whole team, let 'em all live. I never understood why anybody'd do that. Still don't, but I'll tell you what it bought you, kid, since you're the first one in a long time who earned an answer. The great frame began, slowly, to turn away. It bought you the fact that I don't hate you, And when I don't hate something, and the odds are a coin flip, and the money's not worth dying over, I walk. Arasaka wants you bad enough, they can send something else. There isn't anything else. But that's their problem. He paused, one dead arm hanging, the breach in his chest sparking. Go home, kid. Wherever home is, before this city sends the next thing. 'Cause it will. It always does. And the next thing might not be as reasonable as me. And Adam Smasher, the last thing in Night City, the killer of Johnny Silverhand and Maine and David Martinez and every legend the city ever made, the sure thing, the immovable object that had never once walked away from a target, walked away. It was, in its own way, the most impossible thing that happened that whole impossible night. Not that a boy hurt Adam Smasher. Others had hurt him. But that a boy made Adam Smasher choose to leave, made the calculus of the sure thing come up uncertain. That was the thing the story would turn on when Watson told it afterward. The way Watson told all its stories, mutated and embellished and passed hand to hand until it became legend. The kid who made Smasher blink. There would be people who didn't believe it. There would be people who swore they'd been there. The truth, as always in Night City, would be somewhere in the neon, and the rumor, unverifiable and immortal. Izuku stayed standing until he was sure Smasher was actually gone. Then his legs finally gave out, and he sat down hard on the bedrock, cradling his ruined arm, green lightning finally, fully, guttering out. They found him there an hour later, Renner, who'd made it out the chute and refused, tranked and half dead, to actually leave, and Song, who had watched the whole thing on scavenged security feeds and understood, better than anyone, exactly what she'd witnessed. They got him out. Osei set the arm, muttering the whole time about bones that shouldn't be able to break the way they'd broken, or heal the way they were already, impossibly, starting to heal. And in a black tower across the water, on the 93rd floor, Hanako Yorinobu watched the feed of Adam Smasher walking away from a target for the first time in the corporation's institutional memory, and sat very still for a long moment, and then turned to the strategist who had told her, 2 days ago, exactly how this would go. You were right, Hanako said, about all of it. He can't be bought. He can't be hacked. He can't be intimidated. And now he can't be killed, not by anything we're willing to spend, because the one thing we own that could do it just decided he wasn't worth dying over. She folded her hands. So, you've earned the question. What do we do with a genuinely good person who cannot be owned? The strategist looked at the frozen image of the boy, sitting broken and unbowed in the dark, and was quiet for a long time. Nothing, she said finally. We do nothing. We close the file. We let him find his way home, and we do not stand in his way. And we count ourselves fortunate that a thing that powerful and that principled wanted only to leave, because the alternative, a thing that strong that didn't want to leave, that decided this city needed fixing, and had the will to try, is the one scenario in all my years I would least like to see. She met Hanako's eyes. We spend our lives, in this company, acquiring things. It is the only verb we know, and once, just once, the correct move is to let something go, because some things are worth more free than they could ever be owned, and this is one of them, and the wisdom is in knowing the difference. She almost smiled. Besides, he's leaving. The black wall opened for him once. It'll open again. My analysts say the resonance is already building. He'll be gone within the week. Let him go, and let it be said that Arasaka, for once, was wise enough not to reach for the one thing it couldn't hold. Hanako considered this for a long moment. Then she closed the file. Izuku found his way home 4 days later. Song's people had tracked it. The resonance the Arasaka strategist mentioned. A slow rebuilding of the same black wall-adjacent instability that had torn him into this world. Cresting again, in the Badlands, beyond the city, where the net grew thin and strange. He went out to meet it with Renner driving and Song riding along, the three of them crossing the wasteland under a sky that, out here, actually got dark. The rift opened the way it had closed, a wound of white-blue light, humming at a frequency that made teeth ache, and on the far side of it, Izuku could feel, faintly, the pull of his own world, the war he'd been torn out of mid-motion, the people who were still, on the other side, staring at the empty space where he'd been. He turned to the two people who had, against everything their city had taught them, helped him for free. "Come with me," he almost said, and didn't, because he understood by now that they couldn't, that this was their world the way the other was his, and that some rifts only opened one way. Instead, he said, "Thank you, both of you. You didn't have to help me. In this city, helping me was the stupidest thing either of you could have done. You did it anyway." He looked at Renner. "You told me the trap. You walked into it beside me." He looked at Song. "You could have sold me 100 times over, and you never did." He almost smiled. "You reminded me that even in a city built to grind that out of people, it doesn't fully go. It's still in there. It's still possible." Song's mad optics gave away nothing, as always, but her voice, when she answered, was not the fixer's flat market red. "I have priced everything I've ever touched, boy," she said. "It's the only way I know how to look at the world, and I could not price you, not once. You're the only thing in 60 years I couldn't put a number on." A pause. "I find I'm glad of it. Go home, save the people who need you, and do it the way you did it here, the stupid way, the way that doesn't run out." Renner just gripped his good shoulder, hard, an old merc who'd forgotten how to feel things feeling something anyway. 50 years in this city," he said roughly, "and the best thing I ever did in it was help some gonk kid who dropped out of the sky and wouldn't stop saving people who couldn't pay him back. You go home, and you remember that even Night City, even here, couldn't turn you into one of us. That's the win, kid. That's the whole win. Now get out of here before the city notices you're leaving and finds a way to make you stay." Izuku Midoriya stepped toward the light. At the edge of it, he turned back one last time and grinned. The tired, freckled, undefeated grin of a boy who'd fallen into the worst city in any world and walked out of it still himself. "For what it's worth," he said, "you two would have made good heroes, where I'm from." And then, before either of them could find an answer to a word that didn't exist in Night City's vocabulary, he stepped into the rift, and the light folded shut behind him, with a sound like a held breath finally released, and he was gone, back to his own war, his own world, his own people, carrying with him the memory of a neon city that had thrown everything it had at him and failed to keep him. Renner and Song stood in the dark of the Badlands for a while, under the actual stars, saying nothing. "You think he made it?" Renner finally asked. "I think," Song said, "that a boy who broke Atom Smasher and walked out of Night City with his soul intact can probably handle a war back home." She turned toward the AV. "Come on, Jack. We've got a city to get back to, and I've got a story to not tell anyone, because if the truth of what happened here ever got out, every gonk in Watson would spend the rest of their lives waiting for a boy who's never coming back." She paused at the vehicle door, and something almost human crossed her ancient guarded face. "Let them have the rumor instead. The rumor's better. The rumor lasts." And so it did. In the months and years that followed, the story of the boy who fell out of the sky and made the Chrome Samurai walk away spread through Watson and then through the whole city, mutating with every telling, growing in the retelling the way all Night City legends grew, until nobody could say for certain whether he'd been real at all, or just a thing the city's endless grinding masses needed to believe in. That once, one night, something powerful and pure had dropped into the worst place in the world, and the worst place in the world had thrown its core and its killers and its rigged game at him, and had lost, and he'd walked out untouched, still kind, still himself, back to wherever heroes came from. In a city that ground up every dream it was ever handed, that was the rarest story of all. A dream Night City couldn't kill. Izuku Midoriya was never seen in Night City again. Somewhere in Watson, a girl named Nadia grew up telling anyone who'd listen about the boy who stood in front of a gun for her and asked nothing back. Somewhere in a chop shop, a scavenger named Rink spent the money he never got, on a tip he never sold, about the most valuable thing that ever walked into the combat zone and walked back out untaken. Somewhere on the 93rd floor a file stayed closed, and somewhere out in the Badlands, under the only dark sky in 1,000 kilometers, the resonance behind the black wall settled back into stillness, its brief, strange door sealed. The boy it had borrowed returned. Night City kept grinding, the way it always had, the way it always would. The core kept ruling. The chrome kept spreading, the dreamers kept coming, and the city kept killing them, one by one, in the neon and the rain. Nothing changed. Nothing ever really changed in Night City. But for a little while, in the worst place in any world, a hero had walked its streets and refused to become anything other than what he was. And even a city built to grind that out of people had, for once, been unable to. The rumor of it lived on in the dark, passed hand to hand, a small stubborn ember of something Night City had spent 200 years trying to extinguish and never quite could. The idea that you could be powerful and good, strong and kind, and that the two together made a thing not even Atom Smasher could bring himself to break. Somewhere in a world of heroes, a green-haired boy woke up mid-motion in a war he'd left 4 days and 1 lifetime ago, and finished the smash he'd started. And in Night City, the neon burned on, a little brighter for having briefly held a light it couldn't keep.